In a sea of tundra and tiny half-dead trees in Canada, it was 5 years ago that I met a demon. It was during a particularly dark winter, and she had invited me into her warmth, claiming that she had been a baker of hell. Her name was too convoluted to be pronounced, and she baked bread that couldn't be eaten, sweet cakes that would burst through your stomach, and gingerbread and cakes that were haunted, wet with tears, and eaten only by the most mind-starved wretches. I was introduced to the demon by Catherine M. Valente in her novel, The Bread We Eat in Dreams. If you don't know Catherine, you should. She's a Nebula and Hugo Award-winning author, and she crafted a incredible, haunting story of a witch demon that called towns and company to itself. Now, I'd never found demons as particularly interesting as a force in fiction. I had skewed more towards Lovecraftian cosmic horrors as my brand of unknowable terror. And save for the love of impish legions of hell and devils in disguise found in Vertigo's Hellblazer comics, I didn't find them particularly scary or interesting. Still, this natural way of writing about the supernatural captured my attention and led me to seek out other demonically unique stories, which, as one thing led to another, introduced me to horrors encroaching in everyday 80s America and the nightmares of hell in deep space. Like the Rings of Dante's Inferno, this led me further down into the publishing world of Black Library and the setting of Warhammer 40,000. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today for Creative Writing and Fan Fiction, our first live stream on Warhammer 40,000. My name is Colyn DeGraaff, and I am the creative director and founder of Cold Open Stories. And over the next 3 hours, we'll be joined by different community authors, including talent from Black Library, as we talk about a great deal of topics. Now, for the next 30 minutes, I'll be speaking with you about the importance of fan fiction, followed by two-time Fast Fiction winner Benjamin Joseph, as he talks about how to craft compelling opening scenes. After that, we have frequent Cold Open Stories author Chris Buxey discussing character-driven short stories. And in an hour and a half from now, we have Black Library author, artist, and voice actor Nicholas Wolfe talking about writing in established setting. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, Cold Open Stories produces a wide range of content, including short stories, writing contests, and full cast audio dramas. Now, on our website, you'll find unofficial stories set in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, where you, the listener, can read, write, and perform. It's a great way to build community and share stories worth telling. Now, all levels of experience are welcomed, and these are fan productions, so whether you're a writer, a voice talent, or a captive audience, please check us out on coldopenstories.com or on social media for the latest news. Now, if you feel so inspired today, do check out our two calls for submission. Fast Fiction 9 is our 1,000-word writing contest, and that's now open, and you have until October 31st to submit your descent into terrible things. And if longer works are more your style, our short story fiction anthology is open until November 30th. Now, this is to say nothing about our voice acting casting call. That's going to be open until November 7th, but today we are talking about the written word. And to start today's Writers and Company, we'll be talking about why fan fiction matters, told through the lens of it as both a transformative work and a space for community. Now, it's not a far leap from Event Horizon and a Reddit search for recommendations like it to find yourself falling down the rabbit hole into Warhammer 40,000. Some will even say that Event Horizon is a pseudo-prequel fanfiction to 40K, even though creator Paul W.S. Anderson has denied the similarities as strictly accidental. Still, the central premise of both, that faster-than-light travel is possible by crossing through a hellish nightmare-fueled dimension, it's similar enough that if you like one, you'll probably appreciate the other. This was my introduction to Warhammer 40,000, beyond a passing familiarity with the tabletop game in my late teens. So, now, not knowing where to start with the franchise, I spent a lot of time reading wiki articles as a modern reader might, with a passing interest in world building. Reading a wiki is not the same as reading a contained narrative, but the experience of diving through one can make you feel like a bit of an archaeologist, uncovering new tidbits of information and pouring from one thread to the next. Now, at the time in 2016, Games Workshop had released The Gathering Storm and had begun to push the setting just ahead a tad. I fell further into this, and this led me to some of my first experiences with official 40k canon. This also led me to my first experience with Warhammer 40,000 fanfiction. The Shape of the Nightmare to Come was a fanfiction piece on heresyonline.net, which dials the story ahead 10,000 years, when all matter of oblivion has torn humanity apart, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Aliens of Swarm and Spore have fused into hellish monsters. Silver Sentinels had finally awoken. Ancient aliens who had held on for so long winked out of existence. And those feral nightmares, demons, finally sprung into the real world without fear of material constraints. Humanity's golden throne flickered its last moment and failed. The setting was world building, but there was also a story being woven here. With this as an endpoint, I worked my way backwards and picking up some novels from across the line. And sure, the marketing of Games Workshop had garnered a lead with me. It had got my attention, but it was actually a piece of fan fiction that had converted me. So here's a fact that might surprise you. 4.7 million fanfics have won the premier award in science fiction and fantasy. Okay, so that's a little bit more of a technicality. See, these 4.7 million stories at the time were part of the site and archive of our own, also known as AO3. The Hugo's 1,800 voting members chose AO3 as 2019's best related work, a category that usually includes books on essays or literary criticism, tie-in works, or other works adjacent to speculative fiction. The Hugos had never nominated unpublished fan fiction before, let alone award it. So this award recognized that an entire fan fiction archive could constitute a single related work, and was worthy of standing alongside some of the most renowned sci-fi and fantasy authors. Now, this indirect example isn't even the most overt occurrence of an unofficial or fan work being elevated to the crowning status of literary achievement. Paradise Lost is essentially a fan fiction of Genesis. Lord of the Flies by William Golding wanted to push back against the imperialist message of original works, so you can find the connection there with Coral Island. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas was remixed from the historical novel Ars de Monseigneur. And back to demons, The Inferno is a self-insertion fanfic by Dante Alighieri that has become profoundly influential in modern media. But not all fan fiction has been positively regarded. Critiques are known, like this one from January of this. This major complaint about fan fiction is that fan fiction writers aren't real writers, that fan fiction is unoriginal, that it doesn't matter because it isn't canon, and that the majority is bad and it teaches you to be bad. To the first consideration, I think we can agree that there are exceptional and mundane material in any craft. There are good and bad painters. There are charismatic and unremarkable actors and actresses. The same can be said for any form of writing. So to segment out an entire craft or medium is reductive. And it should expose that criticism as a misunderstanding of how life is made up of high highs and low lows. Fan fiction is no different. In fact, Katie Davis, professor of the University of Washington's Information School and co-founder of Digital Youth Lab, along with her University of Washington colleague Cecilia Aragon, recently spent 9 months studying young authors writing on fanfiction.net. Now, funnily enough, they found older, experienced authors were more likely to show up on AO3, but we'll talk more about that later. For the younger authors, they found that communal tutoring happened on fanfic websites, which led to measurable improvements in people's writing. They analyzed 61.5 billion words of fanfiction and 6 billion words of reviews, tracking their lexical diversity or complexity of vocabulary. They discovered that for every 650 reviews writers received, their vocabulary improved as much as if they had aged 1 year. Now, an insight from this can be the journey versus destination. If you're coming to fan fiction, one of the gleaning and inspiring components is you're arriving in a space where people actually want to write. Nobody's forcing them to. They have a passion and a will to be there. And even if they aren't the best, not yet, They have taken the time to do more than any other reviewer or Twitter critic who had 2 minutes to spare. They poured hours into something that meant a lot to them. And in doing so, they've brought their unique personal knowledge to the setting, and they're about to engage in a series of critical creative actions with an online community. So those actions are these on screen. Though there's a wealth of influences across multiple forms of media as well as lived experience, fanfiction allows aspiring writers to study and create stories by breaking down the foundations of existing works of fiction, learning its ins and outs, and then putting it back together in new ways. It's much like a watchmaker who learns to repair timepieces or a mechanic working on your car. You're learning to write your own novel by first deconstructing a setting that you admire. This leads to a central tenet of how I view fanfiction, and one that will probably agitate the most impassioned gatekeeper. Is this story canon, or is it a good story? Gatekeepers and gatekeeping is present in nearly every fandom, but it appears especially prevalent in geek and nerd culture. There's a journalist, Swapna Krishna. She wrote a piece back in 2018 that resonated with me on this, as she was discussing Star Trek and Captain Marvel. And the insight was that although it is undeniable that you can and are allowed to dislike a piece of media, often the source of that dislike in fan culture wasn't with the story itself, but with the irritation of forced diversity. In this commentary, there were findings of arbitrary limits on what it meant to be part of a group. So again, make no mistake, fanfiction is written to the standards of the community. It is the democratization of voice, the majority that will speak and will decide what pieces can be moved forward. Consider this then. What we could consider a good story does require you to be familiar with the characters, the settings, and the plot threads you're basing your fan fiction on. Fan writers choose their subjects because of their love of the original story, and usually this compulsion to digest as much of the content as possible. Once you have a familiarity established, you can then start to deviate away from it, introducing unique elements and giving yourself the flexibility to evolve your writing in stepping stones. The problem is that many writers spend more of their time world building rather than building character. You have to lay down the setting. You have to consider the world before you start to create figures populating it. So based on just the sheer amount of time and effort required, aspiring authors are never giving themselves enough time to learn how to write compelling characters. Too much time is spent on the world building. This is something that fanfiction can actually address, given the instead of creating poorly formed characters and then struggling to understand why their characterization isn't working when the stories are shared in a community, authors already have a fleshed out world, a sandbox, and a setting that they can play with, and begin to inject or create characters to have a better understanding of what makes good characterization work. Fanfiction gives you the world. It's a shortcut to character. It also gives us the chance to remix influences. Now, fanfiction comes in all shapes and sizes. First person, second person, third person. There's crime, romance, paranormal, contemporary drama, pornography, we know. Effectively a style and a genre for everyone. And when you develop your taste, your talents are still aspiring to reach that. You may not even find the stories that you want to read with the setting. An example of this that I experienced was trying to find a story in the Black Library Publishing House of Traitor Guardsmen, a non-cultish, competent paramilitary faction of renegades with a hint of occult influence. When I was looking around online at the time, it didn't exist, or at least in the form that I wanted to read. That was the impetus for writing Hounds of Bedlam, an audio drama that combined elements of Warhammer 40,000 with three influential works to me as a reader. William Horchberg's Falling Angel, which you may know as the film Angel Heart, The Grey, based on Ghostwalker by Ian Mackenzie Jeffers, and the Chinese drama City of Life and Death, written and directed by Liu Shuhan. Again, when you can't find the stories you want to read, you should be compelled to write your own. There was a throwaway line in Dawn of War tie-in by C.S. Goto, and there was a now defunct Wayback Machine link to an ancient Games Workshop website that had mentioned Lanthralac, and that led to the creation of the story Agtroll the Counterfeit Blade. I worked in the setting and want to inject tales of mythology like the Drinwin, the White Hilt, in Welsh mythology, the Phra Sangkhan Kayasi from Thailand, also called the Sword of Victory, which had an incredible tale about a blade handed down through generations of finishers and sultans onto descendants. Again, when you can't find what you're looking for, there's an interest in trying to merge these settings together. And once you have a familiarity established, you can actually do this, introducing unique elements and giving yourself the flexibility to evolve your writing in stepping stones. Now, finding your own voice in writing and coming into your unique style isn't easy. It can take years for you to realize what your style is. Since you're using characters and settings that are already developed, your mimicry of their voices, realize it or not, is borrowing their cadence and helping you develop your own. An example of this that many people are probably familiar in our section of the internet, the Call of Cthulhu. The mirroring voice is well accentuated by the author that by this point we can recognize Lovecraft's influence in a lot of different fiction, even outside of Warhammer 40,000. And to this point, writing is also a solitary profession. It's an uphill battle to get something that may be entirely unknown seen, let alone read. But in writing fan fiction, you have an immediate audience encouraged to review your work, offer praise, offer critique, and encourage you to continue. Now, generally, fan fiction writers' strengths are thought to be poorly celebrated, and any feedback on their weakness is very gently conveyed with the sandwich method, a little bit of positive, a lot of negative, and a little bit of positive at the end you'd consider. However, reviews of fan fiction were found to be overwhelmingly positive. Aragon and Davis found that out of a sample of 4,500 reviews on fanfiction.net, only 1% were what they called non-constructive negative. Fanfiction sites are energetic learning environments. Unlike in the classroom where we're introduced to creative writing, everyone is thrilled to be there, and that genuine interest ties to more engaging learning that Aragon and Davis call distributed mentorship. Now, gone are the days of traditional two-person mentor-mentee relationships, at least in the way that we used to think of them as how authors could improve. Writing communities are now mentored by an entire online fan base who can provide small pieces of feedback on various series of blossoming writing skills. This goes back to our foundations. Different community members are, in Aragon, cumulatively much greater than the. In focusing on specialized critique and criticism, different forms of expertise can come forward, making fanfiction communities more honed to helping aspiring writers' strengths and weaknesses across a broad range of specializations. Fanfiction matters because it can help dust out the attic of the mind and create an interest in writing that may have been unrealized or stunted during education. And it also introduces writers to other individuals who can have specializations in plot or in dialogue, etc. This is creating a space beyond isolated creativity. You don't have to write in a bubble. There are friends that are around that can offer feedback and critique. Now, quick interjection. If you're looking for people to workshop your fiction worthy of Black Library, just head on over to coldopenstories.com and we have our Discord there. There's a lot of people sharing their work and they'd be more than happy to help. Now, the last key point on why fan fiction matters is that it exists outside the literary marketplace. By being non-commercial, fan fiction are stories that can be told outside the pressure or constraints of a publishing mandate. In the case of Black Library and Warhammer 40,000, we know there is a corporate requirement to have fiction leverage the sale of models, toys, and tie-ins. This freedom has allowed the following 5 stories on coldopenstories.com to be both award-winning and the most trafficked. They've risen to the top. And it should be no surprise that each one of them involves aliens as a prime motivator, and 4 are told from a Xenos point of view. Add that 2 are not even represented in the modern tabletop, and you realize how fanfiction can explore the margins of a setting and find a hungry audience when there is a non-commercial component. Fanfiction is speculative by nature and uses a world to explore new characters, encourage authors to find their voice, and foster communities that can uplift aspiring talent to one day stand alone and break the world open when they're ready to start telling original tales. Fanfiction is made for free, but it's not for nothing. Business models built upon commoditizing fanfiction exploring the possibilities of a digital tip jar, may for a time find themselves coming into some successful fundraising. But as legal crackdowns and IP shifts have demonstrated, these are not impervious to corporate control. Instead, it is the organic, non-commercial communities that can freely and transformatively remix, create, and impassion without any hope of monetary reward. There may be something depressing about a labor that doesn't result in any financial compensation, but it is possible to be a fan without being offered anything for it. That can be an indicator in where the creator's passions lie. So in closing, be hellish, write like a demon, be interested in mythology, folklore, and fiction. Life is not divided into genres nor stories. Blend, find your voice, bring your own drama, tragedy, comedy, pornography, and adventure influences to bear. Now, I just want to thank everyone for taking some time to be with us here today. We have a lot of great things planned for you over the next few hours. First, we have Benjamin Joseph, who will be talking about opening scenes from 7:30 to 8 GMT. Then we have Chris Buxey, talking about character-driven short stories from 8 to 8:30. And Black Library author Nicholas Wolf will be talking about writing in established settings from 8:30 to 9. Following this, we have some special insights from Black Library from 9 to 9:30. And from 9:30 to 10, we have a live narration by Megan Humans of DU by Joyce Chng. After that, we'll just have a little summary. So please stay tuned. We look forward to having you with us for the rest of the evening. And grab yourself a drink, and we'll see you in a little bit.
forget the promise of a brighter tomorrow. In the grim, dark future, there is only war. ColdOpenStories.com. Short fiction, audio dramas, produced by fans.
Battleship in range. Torpedoes released. Signal priority high.
Classification.
Near cyclonic.
Blast shields begin to close down around the ship. Emergency lighting turns on.
Protocol breach. Scrambling frigates. Moving to ramming speed.
I did not approve that order.
Regrets. Establishing torpedo screen logical response.
And Asterios, I will slave your mind into compliance.
Update. Frigates reaching point of...
Not an acceptable sacrifice.
Machine spirit of fort pilgrimage outweighs human capital.
Those are my faithful.
Dropship was faithful.
You can't save them!
Only the machine is eternal.
This is not a committee.
The frigates launched from the pilgrimage intercept the torpedoes.
So welcome back. Thank you for sticking around. I am joined here today by award winner Benjamin Joseph, a 40K fan and writer based in Dubai, enjoying a lot better weather than I am here, and he's trying to find the grimdark while surrounded by eternal sunshine. So Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Colyn. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be here, and we're going to talk about how to start your story. So I'm going to start this off by starting it off. Okay, do we have the slides up? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to throw this out by giving you the answer straight away. I'm just going to answer the first question. How do you start a story? It's relatively straightforward. At least the answer should be. Get the reader's attention. That's it, right? That's all you have to do when you start out on a story. You don't have to introduce your main character. You don't have to set the scene. All you have to do, the only job of your first opening line when you start writing a story, is to get your reader to read the second line of that story. If you can do that, then you're golden. Okay. So that's what I want to talk about today. If I want to drill this down, I want to talk about how do you get a reader's attention when you start out a story. Okay. So I'm going to go through 4 different ways. They're just arbitrary categories that I like to think of, with different ways in which you can get a reader's attention and pull them into a story. So one way is going to be to start out with a really dramatic statement. Another way might be to pull your reader into a strange and unusual world. Or maybe you want to drop your reader straight into the middle of some action. Or, and my favorite one is to start at the end. So I want to run through basically some examples. We're going to look at a whole bunch of first lines, opening scenes from different stories, from different genres, and see how they grab a reader's attention. And then we can talk through a little bit why they work, and then maybe what lessons you can take from that into your own stories. So maybe we'll start out with the first one. Right? Start out with a really dramatic opening line, an intriguing one. So let's try this one for size. The first kidnapping wasn't my fault. This is such a good first line. This is a fantastic first line. It's such a good first line that they actually put it on the front cover of the book. Now, why is this such a good line? Well, because A, you've got kidnappings, which are exciting no matter what. But the first kidnapping instantly implies there's more kidnappings. And if the first kidnapping wasn't your fault, were the other kidnappings your fault? Within like 6 words, starting off with this story, you've instantly grabbed attention because you've started off so many questions in the reader's head. You're having all these thoughts. You're going to read that second line. You're going to read that third line because you want to answer all these questions that are being sparked off in your head. And this is the art of this dramatic opening line. Grab someone's attention by shocking them, by throwing them out something that they're not expecting and that they want to find out more about. Yeah. So let's look at an example as well. Given we're on cold open and we're talking Warhammer and we're talking 40k, let's look at an example in genre. All right. This is the classic, right? This is obviously got to be the most famous opening line in Black Library. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor. And it does a lot of the same things that the previous one did. You're basically shocking the reader. We all know, if you're a Warhammer fan, you know that Horus does not slay the Emperor. That's like a fundamental fact of this setting. So to start your story with this opening line instantly shocks people. It instantly grabs attention, and it starts people asking themselves the question, so what is happening here? What is actually happening here if Horus is slaying the Emperor? But the thing to bear in mind with this one especially is that this works because we're Warhammer fans. Because we know that this isn't what's supposed to happen. Dan Abnett knows what the reader's expecting to see, and he's playing a game by not showing you it, by showing you the opposite. And that's one of the keys to this dramatic opening statement technique. You have to know what your reader is going to find shocking or going to find intriguing. And that's a bit of an art in itself. So I guess a question comes out of that, right? Could you write a dramatic or a shocking statement that doesn't rely on any prior knowledge? Can you start out with something which maybe sparks questions and intrigue, but does that without requiring somebody to have prior knowledge of the story? So try a different example. Click on Slaughterhouse 5. All this happened, more or less. Okay. Now, what this is doing, the first thing to notice about this opening line, right, is this opening line doesn't tell you anything really about the story. There's nothing here which requires prior knowledge or anything like that going in. This could be the opening line to almost any story. But what this is what I like to call a hype line. Basically, he's starting out by telling you this story is going to be so crazy and it's going to be so out of this world that I have to tell you up front that it is true, because you're not going to believe it otherwise. He's hyping his story up with that opening line. And it could, as I say, it could be for any story. But he starts it out by hyping up the story that's to come so that you're interested. You want to know what the story is going to be, because if it's so amazing that he has to tell you up front that honest it's true, notwithstanding the last part, then it must be a really cool story and I must want to know more about it. Now, there's another way of doing this as well. So Kurt Vonnegut here, he's hyping his story up, that hype line. Now, a different way that you might want to intrigue somebody, rather than hyping your story up, you might want to take another classic example, The Outsider, or so Mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. So what we're doing here is you're throwing out that dramatic line, kind of, Mother died today, but then he undercuts it. He plays it down. Something that should be dramatic and intriguing and interesting is suddenly being played off as if it's nothing. And that's intriguing too, because you've got something that should be a big deal and it's not. And you want to know why. Why is this guy so apathetic to the fact that his mother has died today? Something that should be really impactful. So again, he's intriguing you. He's starting out with a sentence or an opening couple of lines, which is drawing you in and making you ask questions. But if you take this a few steps back, I guess, that's not usually how we're taught to open stories, right? When we start writing, when we start reading, the stories we start out with are always once upon a time, or in a galaxy far, far away, if you started out at the cool stuff, right? We're often taught that rather than starting with these dramatic opening lines, you should start by setting a scene. That you should start by telling us where somebody is before you start on with all of this kind of drama and things like that. So I guess the question is, if one way of opening your line, your story, is to go with these dramatic statements, can you open up by setting a scene? And the answer is, of course, you can. But it's interesting to look at how people do that. So let's look at another sci-fi example, right? George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. So Orwell here, he's setting a scene, right? He's telling you it's a bright, cold day in April. You can visualize it. If you've been in that kind of environment, you can already feel, the cold on your skin. But what he does, what he makes sure to do, is to throw in a hook at the end of it. It's almost like he starts out by setting a scene and then also throws in that intriguing line. The clocks are striking 13. It makes you ask that question of, well, how are they striking 13, of course? Why aren't they striking 12? So what Orwell's doing is setting a scene, but he's making sure to include something to intrigue you as well. He's never just setting the scene on its own. Now, another really good example of a way you can set a scene in an interesting way is this one, Neuromancer. So the sky above the port was the color of a television tuned to a dead channel. So what Gibson's doing here is, again, he's starting out by setting a scene, he's giving you that background, all that weather, but he's describing it in such an interesting way. The color of a television tuned to a dead channel, which is possibly harder to imagine these days when we all have digital televisions and everything. But you get what he's going for, and the way he describes it makes it sound intriguing. Now, what you could also do is combine all of that together. Okay. Bit of classic literature example here, right? The bell jar. This is honestly one of the best opening lines, I think, ever. It was a queer, sultry summer. The summer electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. So what Sylvia Plath's doing is she's setting a scene. She's describing the world around her at a queer, sultry summer, and she's doing it with language that's really intriguing, that's really evocative. I mean, it's sexy, right? Queer, sultry summer. It's dangerous. You've got electrocuted in there. You've got all these things to hook somebody. And then she throws in that twist ending as well. And I didn't know what I was doing in New York. And neither do we. As a reader, we don't know what she was doing in New York, but we probably want to find out because the way she's described it coming in is sexy, it's dangerous, it's interesting. We're asking ourselves questions. And this is the key. If you want to start your story by setting a scene, that's absolutely fine. But make sure you have an interesting scene to set, or that you throw in a hook, something to put the intrigue in there as well. Don't just start out with pure description on its own, because that doesn't get the intrigue going. That doesn't pull the reader in. And it's maybe not nice to call out, bad examples, but I'm gonna anyway, because it's fun. So this one's often quoted as like the worst first line in published literature, and it's so bad that I'm not even going to read it out. Partly because it's really, really long. Right? Look at this. But even beyond just being long, it's boring. If you add all this is the description of a stormy night, and not even a particularly bad stormy night. It's just your average, windstorm or rainstorm that you get in London. There's nothing that he describes here which provokes a question. There's nothing in what he describes which is unusual or intriguing. It's as if he just wrote, it was raining that night or something like this. It's just not interesting. It doesn't make you want to read more. And this is the trap that you often fall into when you try to start a story by setting a scene. You just set a scene without any thought to intriguing or pulling your reader in. Okay, so let's just put that one to side. What's the opposite then of, we've looked at dramatic opening statements. We've looked then as starting out by setting a scene. The opposite of setting a scene, if you don't want to fall into this trap, might be forget about the scene entirely. How about just dropping someone straight into the middle of some action? Now, this is a really, really common technique. It's common in genre literature. It's really common in Black Library. It's common, I would say it's probably the most popular way to start a story in modern literature. Okay, so let's start out with some Black Library. Commissar Severin Rain slides a fresh magazine into her bolt pistol with a hard click. At this point, we don't know who Severin Rain is. We don't know where she is. We don't know what planet she's on. We don't know what the weather is. All we know is that she's got a gun and she's just loaded it. And that means she's probably going to shoot someone. It's Chekhov's gun in a novel format, right? You've put a gun out there, you've loaded it, someone's about to get shot, and I want to find out who. You're asking yourself questions again. You're asking yourself questions about who's going to get shot. You want to read that second line because you want to find out what's about to happen. You're being put into an interesting situation. What's going to happen? Yeah. So, really topically, another example that I threw in at the last minute just after I saw June the other day, because I felt like it was worth discussing. So again, there's a couple of traps in this, in dropping the reader in the action, right? If you just drop a reader into the action and the scene that you're dropping them into is itself boring. Let's start out with the action of me doing the washing up after dinner. That's not interesting. You have to make sure the action you're dropping someone into itself has some interest. And I think June is a really interesting example. Because if you look at this opening line, if you take out that middle section, and if Frank Herbert had just said, in the week before their departure for Arrakis, an old crone came to visit the mother of the boy, Paul, that on its own would probably not be as impactful as an opening line as this one is. But because Herbert throws in that bit in the middle about when the final scurrying about had reached an unbearable frenzy, he hypes up the tension. He tells you that the scenario he's about to drop you into is very high tension. It has high stakes. So you get interested. Now you want to know who that old crone is. Now you want to know why is Paul significant, because whatever's happening, it has importance. And that's a key point. Throw someone in the action, but make sure the action you're throwing them into is interesting. And then just to show you that this doesn't just happen in genre fiction, sci-fi, etc., you've got the classic one, right? I mean, I'm sure we all know this. It's such a good first line that they ended up using it as the first line for the movie as well. Right? We were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs started to take hold. It's such a good line. We don't know who the we are. We don't know why they're on the edge of the desert. All we know is that they've just taken some drugs and something is about to happen. And that's interesting. Like, you've just dropped us into, again, if you just started out, if you ended the sentence with, we were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert, not by itself interesting enough, but by throwing those drugs in at the end, you get our attention. You know that something is about to happen that's going to be fun. And especially back when this was published, obviously, when that was more of a taboo, perhaps, and there was something more, I don't know, of the time with it. But even now, reading that, something interesting is about to happen. Okay, so we've looked at 3 so far. We've looked at starting out with these dramatic sentences, just to grab your attention. We've looked at setting the scene. We've looked at dropping you in the middle of the action. Now, I would say those are the 3 most common ways of starting a story. I think if you look at most successful literature, you can probably classify them within one of those 3 categories. But there is a fourth one that I just want to quickly touch on as well. Okay. I call this starting at the end. And so we'll start with secret history. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. Now, if you've read the book, you'll know that Bunny's death actually doesn't happen until maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, roughly. But Donna Tartt puts his death in the first line of the story. She's already told you. So when you meet Bunny later on, you know he's going to die, and you're just trying to understand how he dies. The questions you're asking yourself now aren't what is going to happen. It's how does this man die? Because I know he's going to die. And what's interesting here is that Donna Tartt she's thinking longer term. She's not just trying to get you to read the second line. Right? All the others, as I say, the aim of your first line is to make you read the second line. But Donna Tartt's not just trying to make you read the second line. She's trying to make you read the chapter, the next chapter. She's trying to make you read the whole novel. She's thinking long term and trying to set up some intrigue and some questions in the reader's mind, which are going to last for the whole novel. And that's a really interesting way of looking at this. I'd say it's not something that you see particularly often, but when it's used well, it can really set up your entire story just with that opening sentence or their opening couple of scenes. And there's another classic example of this, right? Again, often quoted as one of the best first lines that has ever been written. So, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aurelio Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. And if you know this story, you know that the rest of the chapter is about that story of him discovering ice. It's only much, much, much later on in the book that we come back to the fact that the colonel is facing a firing squad. He's facing death at this point. We don't know why, but he is about to die. And yet we don't address that until much, much later. It's like Marquez just like throws something out there. By the way, this man's about to die. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a story about ice now. He sets something up which is going to keep your interest and keep a question in the reader's mind for for a large chunk of the story to come. So it's almost taking some of the techniques that we've talked about earlier in terms of getting the readers to read the second line, but then extending it and getting them to read the entire story. And it's something that you can use in short stories as well. Setting up some tension, which is going to carry you through right to the end of the story. Okay, so let's summarize some of this. Some of the common things that you see with these good story openings that we've talked about. A lot of them make bold statements. Even obviously that first category that we talked about was dramatic statements. Those by definition are bold statements. But even the other ones, a lot of them are quite short, quite short sentences, punchy. They make quite dramatic statements very quickly, even if you're setting the scene like George Orwell was with the 1984 one. You're setting a scene, but you're making it in a really punchy way. That sentence is maybe only 10 words long. It's not a complicated sentence. The second thing that a lot of good openings will do is they set the story in motion. What you don't want to do is start out with background information which is only relevant later on. You want to start out where the story starts. Okay, so take Fear and Loathing, right? At that point when they're in the car and the drugs are about to take hold, we don't start at the point where they take the drugs, because it's not interesting at that point. We start at the point where the drugs actually start to take effect. The other main thing, and I keep coming back to it as I've been going through this presentation, is good openings make your reader want answers. They make the reader ask questions of themselves and the questions of the story. And they're going to read more in order to get the answers. Now that does come with a kicker, right? If you are starting out your story in a way that makes your reader want answers, you do usually have to make sure you give them the answers, right? If, for instance, if you come back to that first example I used with, what was it? The first kidnapping wasn't my fault. If you then go off on a different story about, I don't know, his love affair with someone, and you never mention the kidnappings again, your reader's going to feel shortchanged. So just make sure when you're setting up these questions in your reader's head, they are questions that you're going to answer. Ideally, they be questions which are very relevant to the story themselves. So if you think back to The Outsider and the way he sets that up with his apathy, and the question that the reader is asking themselves is, why does this person not care so much about their mother dying? Well, that's actually the main thrust of the entire story. That's what the entire story is going to explain to you. So just make sure when you're setting up these questions in the reader's head, they are ones that you are going to and want to answer. Okay, so just very quickly then, what would a bad opening look like then? It's one that's going to get bogged down in the detail, that isn't going to hit with that, it isn't going to punch someone on the face, it's going to describe things which are irrelevant to the story. It's something that starts before the story itself does. So if I tell you the story about Jack and Jill going up the hill, that's where the story starts. If I tell you the story about Jack and Jill when they're born to their mother and father, it's irrelevant. Get rid of it. Start where the story starts. And then bad openings are ones that don't evoke questions in your reader. So that's what I'll leave you with. It's obviously it's subjective. These are my categorizations of openings and my ideas of what a good opening looks like. You may have different ones, but I think this is an interesting thing to discuss, and I'm going to leave you on the good openings page because I think that is the key. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Over to you, Colyn.
Awesome. Benjamin, thank you so much for spending time with us. A fantastic presentation, a lot of great insights, and some homework for people that have not read every book on the list, I think, at this point. Just keeping an eye on the chat, story openings must punch reader in the face. A great piece of information. Some things just to play off what you were saying there is that when we talk about like starting the story at the end, one of the pieces of feedback in the chat was that can actually be a deterrent for some readers to start at the end. When I think of starting at the end, I think of the process rather than the destination. I think of that as an aspiring author coming up with a way of going, okay, what's my destination? Where do I write to? I'll start at the end and then work my way backwards. Do you have any sort of feedback on how that can be a turnoff or anything that you've learned about that way of writing?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because you have to be very careful because you have to very often your ending will have stakes to it, right? Let's imagine that the ending of your story is going to be a climactic duel between a space marine and a chaos space marine or something like this. By the time you get to that ending, you want to have built up the stakes so that we feel that conflict. We actually care about the two people who are fighting. And if you push that to the start of your story, you'll start opening up with that before people have started caring about those characters. And that is dangerous because that means that your conclusion doesn't have the weight and the power that it needs to. So if you look at the examples I did about kind of starting with the end, what those authors are often doing is kind of throwing out a very short hint at what the ending is going to be, rather than actually starting out describing in detail. If you look at the Marquez, you don't want to start out with him getting shot and dying. It doesn't have any weight. But you start out with the fact that just mention the fact that he's facing death, and then go into your rest of your story and come back to that later. And there's definitely a delicate balance there. And I think there is definitely a trap where you can go into too much detail too early on. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but it's definitely a tricky balance to strike. But when you can do it, it's really effective. I mean, those are two real classic examples.
Well, you also pulled into a few examples there. Your first two examples both involved unreliable narrators. And in that example, the story is starting with character, not with world building. Compare that with George Orwell or Camus, and I think it's easier for people to miss that with those, yes, they are world building, but they've also become very accomplished at making a single sentence do two things at once. And I think that's when we talk about writing short fiction or a 1,000 word writing contest, space is at a premium. And you have to approach of just saying not what are lines critical, but which can do double duty of what sets the world and what sets character at the same time. Do you feel that in writing for fast fiction or a 1,000 word very brief piece that you would be more inclined to start with a setting piece or a character piece?
I mean, if you're giving me the choice of the two, I'm always going to go character, right? I think that is the way to always start your stories. If you have an intriguing character, that is generally much more impactful than an intriguing setting. And I think that's particularly the case, just personally, when you're writing with something like 40K and fan fiction, because at the end of the day, I know a flying skull, for the average reader might be an intriguing setting. But for 40K, that's just going to be your average Monday, right? What's going to pull people in much more effectively is an intriguing character. But personally, as you say, I'm not sure that if I was to choose an opening, I would choose that dichotomy of the two. I would definitely try to get a statement which is doing both of those at the same time. And you're right that in fast fiction, in short fiction, you have to get sentences which are doing dual duty. And I think even not in fast fiction, even not in short fiction, when you're opening up your story, you have to get a lot into that opening in order to grab people's attention. So that technique that you build up if you're writing fast fiction of having sentences do double duty, of setting a scene and a character and intriguing people all at the same time, that's a really good skill that serves you well no matter what you're writing. Because at the end of the day, you still only have an opening couple of words to grab people's attention, even if you're writing a novel. You can't guarantee people are going to read that full first chapter.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that writing short fiction gives you a lot of skills which are very useful in writing opening sentences for anything, to be honest.
And my final question for you, because we're kind of at time, unfortunately,
Sure.
would love to be able to talk about much longer, much more. With writing specifically in this context, and it's cold open stories privileges throwing people right into the heat of the action. I think that with the line, I was there, I was Morris, play the Emperor. I think many of us were also kind of pausing because the assumption might have been, I will die on this world. I will die on Armageddon, which is another famous opening line. But whether you are familiar with 40K or not, there can be openings that are very arresting. Do you find that when you were writing your own fan fiction, that you feel more inclined to really 40Kify it, or are you just like, I just want to make sure something that just really feels authentic to the characters in that moment?
I think the latter. I don't. It goes back to that point about your first sentence doesn't need to introduce your setting. It doesn't need to necessarily pull you straight into this. It has to just get your attention. And I think that has to be the priority. If you can make it do double duty and bring and tell people up front that they're going to a sci-fi world, into a grim dark world, great. But that's almost it's a secondary consideration. I'm looking for what is the right first line for this story, not what is the right first line for this setting. That would be my personal view coming in. And I think if you look at a lot of the stories that have done well with cold open, I think that's a trend that you tend to see. And even, as you say, with Black Library, I think if you pull out a lot of Black Library first lines, a lot of them open up. I mean, I did pull out a whole bunch of examples that I obviously didn't use in this presentation just because of space. A lot of them are just starting out with generically arresting lines. That Armageddon one is a great one as well. That would work well for any setting. And I think, you're just looking to grab interest first and foremost. The sci-fi stuff, the 40K, the grimdark, that can come through at any point in your story. But they're never going to get there if they're not interested to start with.
Exactly. Benjamin, thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to wrap up here and get started with our next presenter. Everyone in the chat, just show them some love. Thank you again for, and we'll for sure be seeing you again soon. Probably you're stiff competition in some future contests.
Cheers, Colyn.
Thank you so much.
I'm a few meters from the open bulkhead when I fold over and start convulsing as the world is kicked out from under me. Pain is racing through my abdomen and I look down. The snow is stained red. And then my right leg isn't where it's supposed to be. The woman bends down to me while I'm spasming in pain. She plucks the empty pistol from the snow and places her middle finger on my forehead. You bitch!
You are now my property.
What?
Welcome back, everybody. A very short break. I am joined now with Chris Buxey, who's a writer and laser safety officer and occasional Tony Stark impersonator. You will notice some of his home decor over his shoulder that can attest to this. Chris has been traveling the Force for nearly 30 years. He looks so young and has so far managed to keep his heresies hidden from the Inquisition, but you can spot him a mile away because he has LEDs with his models that are brilliant and beautiful. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Hi, no problem. Happy to be here.
Happy to be here. So, what are we talking about right now? We're going to be kind of basing off of our last session. Let's just jump right into it.
Yes, great. Okay, so well, what I'm going to be talking about today is character-driven short stories. So, is the presentation on the screen? Yep, excellent. Okay, yeah. So, as Colin kindly said in the introduction, my name's Chris Buxey, and I'll be talking about character-driven short stories today. So, some of you might know me from my stories on Cold Open. Some of you may know me from my plays, and of course, some of you might know me from my LED miniatures as well. But yeah, today's topic is stories. So, first of all, I should say there is no correct way to write a story. If there was a correct way to write a story, that's what we'd all be doing. And you wouldn't need writing seminars like this because there would just be one fixed approach that we could all follow. And, if anyone does tell you that there's a correct way to write a story, then to paraphrase, they're probably selling something. So character-driven short stories are just one approach, and it's an approach that I tend to take quite a lot. Actually, if you've read any of my stories, they tend to be sort of quite character-focused, just because it's sort of a method that I enjoy. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be sharing some tips and advice that I've harvested over the years for writing effective character-driven short stories. So, obviously, character-driven short stories are very much focused on a character. And when we talk about focusing on a character, normally we're talking about focusing on their journey. Now, a journey doesn't necessarily have to be a physical journey. It's basically a change in the character or a change in their circumstance. So it can be a physical journey, a trip from point A to point B, but it could also be a sort of a mental journey. So how they change their outlook on life or their surroundings. It could be an emotional journey as well. So over the course of a relationship between two characters. And often these character journeys begin with the character being dissatisfied with their circumstances and seeking to change them. So they can also begin with what's known as a call to adventure. So you'll begin with a character, enjoying a sort of a peaceful existence, and then something happens that's out of the ordinary, a disruption to their world. Classic example, of course, is when all the dwarves turn up to Bilbo's house in at the start of The Hobbit. That is the classic call to adventure. So these stories then end with the character either changing their circumstances or learning to accept their circumstances with a new outlook on their world. So they've either had this physical journey or this mental journey or this emotional journey. And I'll talk about closing character arcs later on. So, one of the most important parts, well, for me anyway, for my approach of character-driven short stories is the phrase "show, don't tell." So, if you've ever sort of read any writing advice elsewhere, or been to a sort of writing seminar before, it's quite a common piece of advice. So, this advice of "show, don't tell" has been around for a number of years. Bit of trivia: this phrase actually originates from the silent movie era when they would have sort of title cards explaining what was going on, between scenes. And this phrase was sort of used to encourage people, don't write loads of stuff on the title cards, show the action, show what's happening. So it's better to let the characters tell the reader about themselves through their actions. So that could be how they interact with other characters or how other characters act towards them. So there's a classic example of this in Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. So there's the scene where Darth Vader's gathering all the sort of bounty hunters on the Star Destroyer, and he's going to he's going to send them off to look for the Millennium Falcon, and he's sort of telling them what he wants them to do, and he stops in front of Boba Fett, and I think this is at that point that's sort of the first time we've seen Boba Fett, and all Darth Vader says to him is no disintegrations. Now, that is a very minimalist piece of writing, but that actually tells us so much. And it sort of it tells us through the interaction. So it's not a case of Darth Vader stopping in front of Boba Fett and saying, "I know you're particularly dangerous, and I know you've got a reputation. I don't want you to, disintegrate these people. I want you to take them alive." He's not spelling all that out. It's simply the fact that he takes the time to warn this person that he doesn't want the people disintegrated. He wants them to be captured alive. So it tells you, without specifically saying it, that Boba Fett is a dangerous person, that he's someone that Darth Vader will talk to as an equal, that he's got a reputation for, brutality and always getting his target. So it's just two words, but it's the way the characters interact that tell us a huge amount about them without having to do this big sort of information dump. So info dumps of character backstories can really slow down the narrative. It's something that you want to, to my mind anyway, it's something that you want to avoid wherever possible. Because especially with info dumps, you tend to be telling the reader how they should feel about the character. So, if you say this character is bad or this character is untrustworthy, and telling the reader how to feel is actually rarely welcome. You need to make sure that you need to take the approach of trusting your reader. Allow the reader to come to their own conclusions about the character. So, this phrase, "Who are you and why should I care?" This is something that, if any of you have spent any time on the writing feedback channel on the Cold Open Discord, you'll probably have heard me say this to people. And this is something I ask myself every time I write a character. Who is this character and why should I care about them? And, this is something we see when people are sort of, pitching story ideas on the sort of writing feedback channel. Um, when you're sort of introducing a character, you need to make sure that the story involving the character and that the journey has some stakes to it. It's got some weight. So why is this character important? What happens if they don't complete their journey? So a character might be setting off to I don't know, find a piece of information or find a missing object, but what you need to establish, ideally without sort of directly telling the reader, is what will happen if they don't achieve this objective. Why does it matter? Why is this character important? And the other bit of advice about why you should care about characters and the importance of their journey is always ask yourself, is this part of the character's life you're writing about the most interesting point in their lives? And if it's not, why aren't you writing about that bit instead? Again, this is something we sort of see from time to time. And, you might have characters perhaps describing or remembering another adventure they've had that actually sounds a lot more sort of exciting than the one they're currently on. So always consider, is this the most important and interesting part of the character's lives? So character agency then. Agency is the character's active participation in the story. So when you're writing, what happens to the character? It's important that the actions of the character actually have an influence on the story. Um, what can happen if you sort of don't allow the character to sort of make decisions and take actions in the story is that you end up with a character that's essentially sightseeing through the story. So they'll walk from one scene to the next, seeing interesting things, seeing action, meeting other characters, but that character is not doing anything. Your protagonist isn't taking any action themselves. They're not influencing the story. They're allowing the story to happen to them. And if you've got a disengaged protagonist, then that can often lead to a disengaged reader as well. The journey of your character will be a lot less satisfying if it was a very passive journey, and nothing they did along the way made any difference to that journey. Otherwise, as I say, they just end up being a sightseer or perhaps a messenger carrying a piece of information from one scene to the next and telling it to other more interesting, more active characters. So motivation then. Motivation is an important part of writing convincing characters. So there's a good test, and I picked this up from somewhere else. I can't remember where now. It was a while ago, but this 3-point test is a really good way of establishing whether your character is believable. So think about your protagonist. Think about what the protagonist wants most in the world, or indeed in the galaxy, and think about what they are prepared to do to achieve it. And also think about what will happen if they do not achieve it. So when you start digging into these 3 points, this allows you to build sort of more well-rounded characters. It allows you to understand their motivation. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spell out what these three motivations are. You don't have to literally write them out in your story, but you have to understand them. You have to at least have a note to yourself. And what this allows is for, well, consistency within your character. So if you know what your character's motivations are and what they're prepared to do, then that allows them to act consistently throughout the story. But it's not just the protagonist as well. It's something that's worth thinking about for all the supporting characters as well, and certainly the antagonist of the story. So you might want to think about, what motivates them as well, what they want. Now, if they're the bad guy, obviously what they want will often be at odds with the protagonist. But what you should avoid is, having a character that is evil for evil's sake, or is, just the bad guy because you need a bad guy. It's said very often, but nobody is the villain in their own story. So, to the protagonist, to the antagonist, to the bad guy in your story, they'll often think, that what they're doing is right, is the correct course of action. So again, when you're sort of making notes about your characters, it's useful to understand what the antagonist thinks their motivation is as well. Something else that it's worth considering is relatability. So how will your character, or sorry, how will the reader relate to your character? What points are there about the character's motivation, or perhaps the character's outlook, or maybe some of the character's quirks, emotions, or even fears? What about them makes them relatable to the reader? So this is something that sometimes people struggle with when it comes to writing Space Marines, because when you've got genetically enhanced soldiers of the far future who are so above mortal concerns, it can sort of make it a bit difficult to find something which the sort of people from this time period can actually relate to. But sometimes that might be it could still be fears, it could be character quirks. There's so many different sort of things that you can make relatable in your characters. But the trouble can sometimes come as well if you have a protagonist that's too unlikable, basically, that's making lots of bad decisions, that's doing lots of stupid things. If they're just sort of even if you want to write that sort of character, they need to have ideally at least one redeeming feature. If they're completely unlikable, then it's going to put the reader off finishing the story. But similarly, if you have a protagonist who is just too perfect, who is just too good at everything they do, who always makes the right decisions, who never gets anything wrong, who doesn't have any flaws, then again, this could also make them unrelatable. Um, so character relationships then. So how your protagonist relates to other characters will also help with their relatability to the reader. So, as I was saying on the previous slide, and it could also help define their motivations as part of the show in Show Don't Tell. So this is especially true when it comes to the sort of the fast fiction format. When you've only got sort of 1,000 words to play with, that may sound like a lot, but that disappears very, very quickly. So essentially, everything your character says and does has to pull double or even triple duty. It has to sort of establish um, how they it has to establish how they relate to other characters. It has to establish a bit about their backstory as well. It has to well, it has to do everything. So humans are often defined by their relationships. So it's relationships with other characters that sort of help to bring characters to life. So, if we look at my fast fiction story, You Will Never Be a Knight, this is about an Exodite brother and sister sort of undergoing a ritual, and how they relate to each other while they're doing it, the way they talk, the way they interact with each other. It starts to build up a picture of their relationship and what is at stake in this ritual. So, things left unsaid. Um, so it's often the case when writing fan fiction that people are putting in pre-existing characters. These characters might be, from a tabletop session, a character they've created for the tabletop that they then want to put into fiction, or it could be a character from role playing or something like that. And very often these characters will have a long backstory, but you do not need to insert that entire backstory into your short fiction or fast fiction. It's just enough that it exists. It gives you a sort of consistent point of reference. For your story and for your character's behavior, but you do not need to copy it word for word into your fiction. So, for example, I've written a lot of orc short stories on Cold Open, and pretty much all of them take place within a setting that's been created by my gaming group. But this never really comes across in the story. I don't mention it. It's part of the consistent internal logic of the story, but it's not something that I really mention. So don't forget, we need to avoid info dumps wherever possible. Again, this ties into show, don't tell. So it's especially important, obviously, in short fiction and fast fiction, where you may not have the word count to spare. So if you must include key points from your backstory, try and keep it to the bare essentials, the things that are critically relevant to the story that you are telling. So it's okay to include a little bit, 1 or 2 points from the backstory, but only the bits you really need. So how do we conclude a character arc then? It's important that the character's journey reaches a satisfying conclusion. So, especially when you're in the sort of fast fiction or short fiction format, they need to sort of complete what they set out to do, really. So, if they're out to look for an object, did they find it? Did they rescue the person they were trying to save? Did they learn the piece of knowledge that they were seeking? So, what did they achieve or learn? How did they change or grow? If they died, what does their death mean for others? And if their death was meaningless, then what does that mean for the setting? So there is always some sort of meaning to be found from a character's journey. So that pretty much brings me to the end. In summary, characters are an excellent focal point for short fiction and fast fiction, and a well written and relatable character often endures long after the story itself. So allow your characters to define themselves through their actions and their relationships. Um, so these hints and tips that I've given you today are all very well, but they're no substitute for practice. So have a go yourself, have a go at doing some writing, and practice makes perfect.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much.
That's
Happy
okay.
to,
No
to,
problem.
to get some knowledge gleaned from you. Some lovely 3-point test Spitting out some great knowledge as well. Is it the most important moment of their lives? The idea of characters who are too unlikable that they're difficult to relate to. But a few questions for you. You've actually done some writing from different perspectives. Why do you think that some writers find it hard to write Xenos or alien characters in 40K?
Well, I think it comes back to sort of finding the point of, relatability that I was sort of talking about. I mean, it's sometimes difficult to, we can sort of, I imagine most of us can sort of write humans because we are humans, and we know, what our motivations are. But it's then sort of working out, what the aliens want, how they sort of interact with each other, and sort of, building up something that's believable as a sort of an alien, interaction. But I mean, when I'm writing orcs, as I mentioned, I sort of do quite a lot of orc fiction. I've always enjoyed orcs as protagonists for a story, and I always try and look at it from the sort of point of view of the orcs. One of the defining things of the orcs is that they approach this life of violence and mayhem that they have as just a fun time, basically. So on some level, when I'm writing orcs, whatever the characters are up to, they're all enjoying it on some level or another. So, and I think it's just basically finding a relatable sort of motivation. With perhaps with the Eldar as well. They're a dying race, or at least a dwindling race. So they're very much sort of looking to preserve what they have, preserve life, friends, and family, and there's some relatable points there, and caring for family and loved ones. So yeah, I think when it comes to things like the most alien of aliens, things like Tyranids, it gets a lot harder. But I mean, we've had some great Tyranid sort of fiction on Cold Open, from all the other writers. And I guess, if all else fails with Tyranids, then hunger is a very relatable emotion.
One that is being felt by those of us who are through their lunch hours or whatnot as well. So I'm glad that you did mention with Tyranid specifically, because we also saw a shift in the setting a few editions ago where Necrons were changed from a soulless, mindless, marauding force to introduce personality, which allowed for a larger introduction of character and those motivations and the dynasties. We were able to see some more of that. I'm not going to go out there and claim that we'll ever see hive mind, grow a personality, but I'm sure somewhere out there is a story to be told of people trying to connect with that large unknowable mind and cosmic horror. To kind of pose another question for people wanting to understand how to write characters, a piece of advice that I usually give is take an acting class. It makes it very personal, very relatable to you. You provided that lovely 3-point test. Do you feel that there is a barrier for character development within 40K, that it's such a grand, epic scope and scale? It can kind of become easy just to write about large-scale battles. Where do you find the interest for you in writing those smaller stories? Like, what motivates you to delve into?
Well, I think that the good thing about sort of 40K is that it's very much a setting rather than, well, I mean, now it is of course a story, and we have the sort of the meta narrative going on with things like the Indomitus Crusade. But I mean, back in the dim and distant past when it sort of started out, 40K was very much sort of a setting rather than sort of an ongoing narrative. And I just think the useful thing about it is that we can all sort of come to this setting, to this story, and we already sort of have this preconceived notion of what the setting is. So often you can sort of write small character stories in that setting without having to spend a lot of time establishing the wider universe, because the wider universe is a shared point of reference. So again, I mean, I think it's certainly something that I do in a lot of my sort of cold open stories. Is I assume people, to get to this point of reading 40k fanfic, people probably have a little bit of an understanding of the setting. So, I don't spend too much time, if any time, setting up the wider universe. I sort of tend to focus it right down on the characters in that particular story, why they matter, and some of their struggles are actually pretty trivial on the galactic scale. It's like the one of my stories about the orc trying to convince the weird boy to come down from his hut in the hill. I mean, it's sort of it doesn't make a jot of difference to the galaxy as a whole, but to that orc it's particularly important. So
Well, that's the stakes, right? Like they are character, personal stakes to them. It's what matters to them most in the world, the most important moment of their. My last question to you, and this a quick 2 minutes, and then we'll bring in our next speaker as well. You've actually written a plethora of stories for Cold Open Stories. Is there a story that stands out to you the most that you've written that you're exceptionally proud of? And I just want you to mention which that might be, and talk a little bit about perhaps the influence for a character or how you came to build.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, I suppose really I'm probably most proud of You Will Never Be a Knight, which was my sort of Exodite story. Um, so this story, I sort of touched on it briefly during my sort of talk. It's about a brother and a sister who are taking part in this ritual to do with who will be a knight, and there's a certain antagonism between them, but there's also a sort of a love as well. And as the story unfolds, we sort of find out a bit about their relationship and what the paths they're destined to follow. And I guess I got a little bit of the influence of that, I think, from my children, because I have a son and a daughter, and sometimes they're best friends, and sometimes they're worst enemies. So it's sort of it's that sort of thing, basically. But yeah, it's just a sort of I was particularly pleased with that one, just because of I think how much I managed to pack into the 1,000 word limit, and the sort of the relationship between the characters, and obviously managed to squeeze a few dinosaurs in there as well. So
Always good.
every story's better with dinosaurs. So
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much. For people looking to check out that story, they can find it in the Fast Fiction Contest for Maiden Worlds and Exodites. Again, that is You Will Never Be a Knight. Chris Buxey, thank you so much for being with us here. We'll have you back again soon to keep talking about some great insights on character. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
eyes act, and the relic's long extinguished edge flashes to life.
You are impressed by broken relics and the toys of shattered gods. How far you've fallen.
Gontilar wastes no time. Like a caged chimera unleashed, his lightning reflexes carry him across the amphitheater in a heartbeat. Spear in hand, he darts forward.
Reap and sow.
The fiend phases in and out of reality, assuming corporeal form for only an instant as it swings its blades.
A spear. Such a toy. Does your pantheon know you're playing with that?
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for staying tuned with us as we are speaking with different contributors for stories. Next one, very excited to have Nicholas Wolf, who's an author, voice actor, freelance artist based in the United States. You can find many of his works on his Twitter account, where he's creating many spooky drawings as part of Inktober. Definitely going to be taking a look. That's at the Nicholas Wolf on Twitter. Nicholas is also a published Black Library today. Going to bring him in. Nicholas, welcome. It's great to see you and to met you in life. You're an incredible individual coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad I get a chance to meet, you know, a lot of these people who I have just previously, you know, only communicated with online in the past. This is thank you so much for having me as part of this live stream, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And we'll have a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll learn some stuff too, which is what I'm always shooting for. So, shall I get started?
Absolutely, let's go for it.
Gotcha. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining. As he said, my name is Nicholas Wolf. I am a writer, artist, voice actor, and a whole bunch of other things because I never figured out what I wanted to do when I was younger, and I decided to just do all of them. Most people probably know me from my work with the Black Library, where I have written fiction for Warhammer 40k, the Horus Heresy series. Horus Heresy series, Warhammer Horror, and the Age of Sigmar lines. I also write several other series outside of that, and also with Aconite books. So what we're going to be talking about today is writing in an established setting. And although this is really going to be more writing geared, I would actually argue that a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today would be equally applicable for any sort of creative working in an established setting. I say that as somebody who has done writing in established settings, has done freelance artwork previously in the video game industry for established settings. So I think a lot of the rules still apply. So, and some of the things that I'm going to talk about that are more writing related are, although they are going to be geared towards the writing in an established setting, I think actually are also equally applicable in some cases to writing your own IP as well. So this is going to be kind of a broad audience, you know, that we're going to be talking to here. So hopefully we'll all be able to get something from that. So what we're going to be talking about today are kind of four main points here. First is how you go about understanding the setting that you're going to be writing in. Second is the all-important rule of cool, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that and kind of how that factors into your thinking process. I'm going to go into some tips for pitching that are going to be specific to, yes, writing in an established setting, but also I think are going to be kind of broadly useful for a wider writing audience if you're writing your own IP or things like that, so especially things I've learned from writing my own IP and, you know, writing in an established setting. And last, we're going to talk about some hard-earned lessons because, gosh, it took me a long time to get here, and I've learned a lot along the way. And hopefully, the things that I have learned will be of benefit to you, the audience, as well. And of course, I'm going to try to save some time here for Q&A at the end. So, that said, let's get rolling. So, understanding the world. What makes the world unique? So, if you're going to be writing in an established setting, it's really easy to get caught up in surface details. For an example here, I've picked Warhammer 40,000, something that's very close to my heart, and Halo, something also very close to my heart. Wasted most of my formative years playing. So at its base, we're talking about you know, genetically enhanced super soldiers. They've got armor, they've got cool guns, right? But you couldn't take a space marine and put him into the Halo universe and have it cohesively make sense. Similarly, the Master Chief would stick out like a sore thumb in the grim darkness of the far future where there is only war. So why is that? And it's all about what is it that makes the setting unique? And if you're going to be writing in an established setting, these are the things that you have to be very intentional about honing in on. Because if you're trying to make it, interesting and authentic based on window dressing, it's not going to work. So here's a great example. The Master Chief. Humanity in this story is young and maybe learning about stuff that they had in the past. Humanity in the world of 40K is old. It's decaying. The Spartans they provide hope. There's hope that they can somehow overcome the enemy if they work together. In the world of 40K, every victory is a Pyrrhic victory at best. Entropy is inevitable. You're just forestalling your doom. No matter how hard you fight, death is inevitable, right? So these are, I'm just kind of picking out kind of high level things, but if you're going to be understanding what makes the setting unique, these are the type of foundational things that you have to really key in on in order, if you want to be able to write it authentically. I have read a lot of authors who have, had me edit their stuff that they're going to submit to like the Black Library Open Submission, for example. And I can tell very well the ones that are really keyed into, okay, what is it that makes, 40K, just as an example, but what is it that makes 40K? What is it that makes us feel like a 40K story? Do we feel that grand melodrama, the, inevitable sense of doom, those types of things that come across in the narrative as like the foundation of it. And that's what makes it feel like a 40K story. Now, this is just, of course, an example of 40K, but whatever established universe you're writing in, this has to be the first place that you stop. Because if you don't get this foundational stuff down and you're just writing a story with space marines or mech warriors or knights and wizards or aliens or whatever else it is, it's just going to ring hollow and cheap. And it will not engage the audience in a way that they come to expect when they're diving into one of these established settings. So that's your first place to stop. Understand the specific things that make the world unique. I'd always say pick out like 5, right? And then as you're going through your process of like creative writing, go like, okay, I'm constantly checking back against these 5 things. Are we violating any of these like core tenets that make this world feel like the world that we fell in love with? So that's just more of a proactive tip. Now, once we understand the setting, now we're going back to the rule of cool. Now, this is to kind of diverge a little bit. I was introduced to the rule of cool when I first got started working in the video game industry, and this was one of my first art directors that I had worked with, and the way that he put it was like, everyone knows what's cool, right? It's an intrinsic thing that resonates with you. What is it that makes this cool? And that can be very broad and vague, but that's something I'm going to talk about here. So I have kind of juxtaposed 2 examples here. We have on the left, Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the Night Lords. And on the other hand, we have Batman. Characters that ostensibly are kind of similar, with some differences as well, obviously, in terms of the setting. But they're both cool, right? They both have an intrinsic coolness to them. Now, the thing about the rule of cool, though, is the things that are cool to you may not necessarily be things that are cool to somebody else. This is something that I have noticed in various other works that I've read and editing that I've done for other people, other settings, is that I can tell that what they're writing was something that was very cool to them. Like they thought this was a really interesting thing, right? And it didn't necessarily violate any of the rules of the universe, but was not really particularly cool to me. Similarly, I know there are many stories that I have pitched to my editors over the years where like there was a certain element of it that I thought was really cool. And again, didn't violate any of the established rules of the universe, right? We went back against our 5 things. Okay, none of those were violated, but didn't resonate with them. It didn't, an instinctual, visceral level go, wow, that's cool, I want to know more about that. So when you're thinking about the rule of cool, you have to think about, okay, not just what's interesting to you, which again, it should be interesting to you, but not just what's interesting to you. What is it that's going to resonate with a broader audience? What is it that, you know, maybe you find cool? Yeah, that's great. But what about the other 9 people out of 10? What do they find cool about this setting? And that's something that, as long as it doesn't violate the rules of the universe, you have to really also hone in on, because I can tell you that I have written very in-depth both pitches and then more advanced things explaining certain things that I thought were really cool. To have the editor just go, yeah, I just don't get it. And, you know, having to be honest with myself, looking back and go, yeah, probably wasn't enough there to really like, I get why that didn't resonate, because that was just one small niche thing that I found really interesting myself and tried to build an entire narrative off of it. And yeah, okay, that wasn't really very cool. So understand the setting, your fundamental rules, and then when you're writing for it, think about what's going to really resonate with the broader audience. What's the things that most of the people that are, you know, coming to this universe to be able to experience find cool? Then you have to make sure that you're going with that as you're building your narrative up further. And of course, the narrative building starts with the pitching, which is what I'm going to talk about here next. And I'm trying to be cognizant of time here because I only have 30 minutes, and succinctness is not my strong point. It's funny. Brevity is the soul of wit is something that I say an awful lot for a guy who writes really long books and is incredibly long-winded. But let's talk about tips for pitching. So this part is going to apply to writing in an established universe, but also this is stuff that is going to apply to if you're writing your own IP as well. So when you're pitching, you want to showcase that you understand the setting, right? You don't want to pitch something that is just so off the wall, like, okay, obviously couldn't fit there, because that shows, hey, you don't understand what it is that fundamentally makes this universe unique. You don't understand why it resonates with them. You might know a lot about a certain subject, but if you can't really articulate, hey, that I understand the fundamental things here in a pitch, it's going to fall flat. And when I talk about pitching, by the way, this can be anything from like your elevator pitch that you're doing to a publisher. This could be you know, a longer, you know, thing that you're submitting. It doesn't really matter the length. The rules are the same. But now here's the other thing, though. You have to show that you understand the setting, but you can't let your knowledge of the setting be a crutch, because, yeah, you know, okay, you can know everything about a Tech Warrior, for example, right? And you can know everything about the different types of different factions and stuff like that, how they're all constructed, the different characters. You can be an expert in that field, like could, you know, run a dissertation off of it. That's great. But unless you can translate that into a story that's going to resonate with people, that's going to engage them with a concise beginning, middle, and end, character, growth, stakes, things like that, just the basic, you know, cornerstone stuff that every story has, the pitch is going to fall flat, because as much as they want to show that you can, you understand the universe that you're writing in and can really hone into why it's unique, unless you can translate that into a story that people can follow, that has, you know, just the basic bones of that narrative is going to have, it's also going to fall flat with an editor or somebody that you're pitching to. And it's going to fall, if it falls flat with an editor, it's going to fall flat with a reader as well. And so I'm going to give you a little tip here with pitching that is kind of on the next section here as well. But with that, don't let the setting be a struggle. This also applies to if you're writing your own IP as well, because you can be really super into whatever it is that you're writing, and you know, chances are you spent all this time thinking about it. Maybe you've drawn a bunch of stuff out or written down a 50-page lore Bible or what have you. That's all great, but if you don't still have the basic narrative elements to bring a story across, no one's going to care. This is something that actually I started doing a long time ago. and has really worked with both my writing in an established universe and my own IP is, but especially the first one, is I have my wife read through all of my pitches. Now, she knows nothing about any of the Games Workshop stuff, aside from the stuff that she's picked up from me jabbering on about it for the last, 14 years. But she really doesn't know a whole lot about it. And that's exactly the point, because when she reads a pitch, she's not going to care about the specific chapter of Space Marines that I might geek out about, or what, enemy they're going to be fighting, or, oh my gosh, there's going to be, they're going to fight the Necrons this time, and I'm a big Necron guy. That was when I first got into, stuff. She didn't care about any of that. But what she is going to care about is, hey, is there a character there that I think I can actually relate to? Do I understand why I should care about what happens to them? What are the stakes if they win or lose, right? Those are stuff that fundamentally every story has to have. And similarly with my own IP as well. When I'm writing a new series or a new IP, I tell her nothing about it. I just have her read the ideas that I've put out there and just see how well she can connect with it as somebody who knows nothing about it and really, frankly, doesn't care about that type of stuff. She's going to care if it's a good story. I'm going to care about all the window dressing. And I think that's really important, because I see very often that people can get really hung up on a certain part of the universe that really is fascinating to them. But they don't have the rest of it. They don't have the rest of the part that actually makes it into a story that people can connect to and relate to. And then the last thing is always be open to criticism. And I'm going to go more into the importance of this and why, but I can tell you this. So before I started writing for the Black Library, I actually got in during their open submission window years back. And I submitted to them for 7 or 8 years, multiple stories a year, every year, before I even got my first actual rejection letter, right? And that's hard to kind of get up and keep running through. But every time that I got feedback from somebody or other people that I bounced ideas off of or things like that, it's helpful. And I'm going to kind of go more into that in the next session, but always be open to criticism, no matter who it comes from. Even if it's somebody who doesn't understand anything about the universe, that's okay. If you're pitching to an editor in an established setting, chances are they're going to critique you if there's things that are off about, hey, this couldn't happen in this setting, or these stakes don't match up. That's fine. Just as well, I take great criticism from, the people that know nothing about the universe that I bounce this stuff off of, where they go, yeah, I don't understand why that makes sense. And of course I'm going like, well, of course it makes sense. Let me explain in great exhaustive detail why this makes sense, and you don't get it. No, that's not the reaction you got to have. You got to go, okay, tell me why that doesn't make sense, right? Because this is just as valid of an opinion as somebody who is an expert in the series. Lastly, let's talk about some hard-learned lessons. So I'm going to be cognizant of time here because I want to save time for Q&A, so I'm going to get through these pretty quickly. Some of these are going to be really more specific to writing in established universes. Some of these are going to be more specific to writing just in general, and some of these are going to be applicable to just creative stuff in general. First of all, the value of ideas. This was something that I was told very early on when I was in the video game industry, is that ideas are inherently worthless because everybody has ideas. If you can't do something with them, if you can't make them tangible, if you can't articulate them for an audience, if you can't create something with it outside of just an idea that's in your head, it's not really that valuable. Now, that's not to say that ideas are worthless, but an idea that you can't turn into something, that you can't share with other people, that you can't explain why they should care about it, it's not valuable. And that's something that it's hard to hear as somebody who, has a lot of ideas, but that's something that very early on I internalized, and I really think has helped to influence me as a creative, not just as a writer, but just as a creative in general. If ideas by themselves have no value, figure out how to turn them into something, then they start to have value and weight. Rejection, as I said before, rejection, criticism is not a bad thing. I have learned far more about how to craft good stories for the universes that I'm writing in by the long list of reasons that I get back from my editor, why all the ideas that I spent all this time, slaving over and submitted to them, it didn't work. And that seems kind of counterintuitive, right? But when I first started off writing for Black Library, for example, it was not uncommon for me to submit, great many pitches to them and have them all come back and go, that isn't going to work. And here's the long list of reasons why you missed the mark. Whereas now, of course, each one of those hurts, right? But now I'm much more efficient at being able to, maybe out of 2 or 3 pitches, be able to, come up with something that's going to really resonate. And that's because I learned just as much from the no and the why this didn't work, or why it didn't make sense, or why it's, just why it wasn't going to go forward, as much as the, hey, we like this, and this is why, and this is the great feedback that you're getting. So don't take that negative stuff to heart, learn from it. I cannot emphasize that enough. This last one's really a more general writing tip, but this could work for a lot of creative stuff. It's more important to get it written than it is to get it right. You only have so much mental space that you can hold for ideas. A drawing can only be so concrete until you sketch it out on a page. A story series can only be so concrete until you start writing it down. Don't get too wrapped up with the thinking about things phase of things. You gotta be able to get yourself into actually putting something concrete on the paper. Even if you're not going to use it, it still allows you to build more concrete things that you can build a larger narrative or a larger something, anything off of. Just don't get too stuck in the ideation phase. Don't be afraid to dive in to things before it's all done. The most recent series that I'm writing right now, called the Tidestone Chronicles, started off by just writing a probably 30-page lore bible of just half-baked ideas that I had been kicking around in my head for probably the last 6 or 7 years, and some drawings that I had made and stuff like that. And I turned it all into a document before I even put pen to paper to write the very first words of the first chapter. And that's okay, because now, in just a couple of months, I've got an entire first draft for a book, right? But if I had spent the last, the next year, as I did with the last 6 or 7, just thinking about it, I think I would have gotten done. Right? So more important to get it written than it is to get it right. And the golden rule, because I know I'm coming up in time here, the golden rule, have fun with it. And this seems like a really intuitive thing to say, and you probably have heard the golden rule is have fun. But here's the thing, if you're not enjoying writing it, chances are good probably someone's not going to enjoy reading it. Now, this isn't to say that it doesn't feel like work sometimes. I have had many a late night, slaving over a keyboard, or, to get stuff done by a deadline. And it's not always fun. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if you're genuinely not enjoying the creative process of while you're doing it, even if it's hard, that can be sometimes a sign that, hey, maybe I've missed the mark somewhere. Maybe there's something that isn't resonating. The reason that this isn't resonating with me is the same reason it's not going to resonate with an audience. You have to be very honest with yourself with that type of thing. Not just that it should be fun all the time, because it's not. I can promise you that. It's not fun all the time. But you should be having fun while you're doing it, at least, the majority of the time. And if you're not, be honest with yourself. Why is this not working? Is there something about this story that isn't clicking? Is there something about this that's not clicking with me? Do I not understand why I should care? All these types of things. Be honest with yourself. Now, I know that I'm basically at time here, so I know Colyn had some Q&A, do I need to close out this window here?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll bring you back to the double panel, and we'll be able to have a conversation. We're going to throw to the chat as well. We've got a bunch of people watching live, which is fantastic. Thank you everyone for being here with us. We're going to leave a little bit of time for some questions to pop into chat here. While we're waiting for those, I just want to ask you some questions as well. Some of the themes that were brought up in your presentation, and thank you again, was that, if you don't get the foundations down, it's going to ring hollow and cheap. Paralyzed by getting the idea on the page kind of falls into a bit of a taste talent paradigm. For people who are fan fiction writers, and if they want to grow, would you agree with the statement that it's as important to write when you're in the mood, just as equally as when you're not?
Yeah, so here's the thing, and I tell this to people all the time. When they, oh gosh, how did you write all these books, right? It's like, if I only wrote when I felt like it, I would never have gotten anything accomplished. I mean, now that's not to say that, hey, when you hit that flow, right? Sometimes when you hit that flow, you're just going, and it's like, hey, I'm not going to bed tonight until I get to the end of this idea or the end of this chapter, or, and that's totally fine. You have to be in tune with when those types of things come. But by the same token, you have to be disciplined enough to be able to say, hey, I'm going to do 1,000 words today, or I'm going to do a chapter a week, or I'm going to do, X thing, right? And there's no set goal of what that has to be, right? It doesn't have to be 1,000 words a day. It doesn't have to be a chapter a week, but it has to be something. Because if you're only ever doing this when you feel inspired to do it, you're never going to get to the end of it. And also, I would argue this, that from my own experience, right, I have had many a time where I have gotten stuck at a point where like, I don't exactly know what to do here. But you break through it and oh my gosh, there's another flow just waiting on the other side of it. But if you don't break through that wall first, you're never going to get to it. So there is definitely value in discipline. And it can help you to get through those hard parts back to the easy part where it flows.
And always be closing, finishing what you start is important, so you have something to submit in there. By doing a little bit of a conversation, trying to go back, did a little bit of detective work, finding that one of your first Black Library pitches went all the way back to 2012. And persistence is obviously a must in the writing profession. We've talked a lot actually about writing communities being a support for aspiring authors. You mentioned your wife being an incredible support for, being able to bounce ideas off and say, does this ring just in terms of character? You kind of alluded to other supports though. What does your support network look like for encouragement?
Oh gosh, for encouragement.
Or critique. I mean, that's just as valuable.
Yeah. No, for critique. I have a handful of close personal friends that some of them are writers, some of them are not, that I have used in the past. I also have had, my dad was actually my very first, support person that I bounced things off of. He was the one who really got me into science fiction in the first place. He was John Carter of Mars, The Chronicles of Barsoom. Like, he raised me reading those stories. So, my very first stories that I had when I was a small kid were bounced off of him. And still to this day, I look at him as a source. So there are some people that have done, and I have been a part of, very broad like support networks where they'll try to solicit feedback from. And that definitely does have value to it. I do also try to avoid analysis paralysis by getting too many people's opinions on things. I like to no more than like 4 or 5 people that I think I trust their unique viewpoint, and I know will provide something that's meaningful to me. In terms of what motivates me to do it, a lot of that support community is honestly a lot of it is the fans. Like, I don't get recognized by name a lot, but if I say, oh, I write for Black Library, oh, I know that, and that to me, and the handful of times where that's happened is like that's very motivating to me. Also, my kids are a support network also. They're too young to understand a lot of this, and they're way too young to read the stuff that I write, and will remain so for quite some time. But the thought that, hey, there will be a point someday where they do read these, the things that I write, and they will think that that's very cool. And perhaps it will inspire them. My daughter she's 7, but she's definitely an aspiring story writer. And I want her to be able to see what you can do if you put perseverance to it, and you don't give up.
Well, that's a fantastic piece of advice, and we do hope that the rule can be transferred, because heaven forbid that can be around for a little bit and disappear just as quickly. We do have a question in chat here from Jenny Strath, who's working on their current Black Library submission. Any tips for the summary section? Do you lay the story out flat, ending it all, or more dramatic, something that would be trying to lure the readers on the cover?
Gotcha. Okay. Jenny, hi. I know I have read several of your works before. She's very talented. She's got a great chance with this. So that's going to depend largely upon what they're looking for. And I don't know the specifics of what they're looking for this year, but typically if you're looking at like an elevator pitch, you're going to want to leave that's like what you're going to see on a dust jacket. It's going to have to end on something that's going to want them to like find out more. And if they're asking for a summary, you should have your beginning, middle, and end, because what they want to see is, okay, does this whole thing as it plays out like pay off in a way that's meaningful, versus a pitch where they're really just looking for, hey, this is the text that I'm going to use to entice a future reader to read this thing, and can you articulate what it is about your story that's going to be exciting for a reader in just a couple of sentences. So I don't know the specifics of what it is that they're asking for, but just as a general rule of thumb from pitching, a pitch is something that it's got to end on something that's going to be exciting, and can you articulate why the reader's going to care versus a summary where they want to see, okay, did you actually think the story out in such a way that it's going to come to a satisfying conclusion that makes sense in the narrative?
Fantastic. We have another question here is what would you say are the chances for stories at the Black Library open submissions which deal not with the main selling factions? That's a little bit more of an editorial question, but I know that you had a little bit of experience with Reborn actually following a regular human kind of going through the dark fall to chaos. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually. So that is a funny question because I spent many years writing Space Marine stories to try to submit to this. I think pretty much all of my stories were Space Marine ones. And Reborn started off as this kind of bizarre body horror idea that I had because it deals with a regular person who falls to chaos, and he's like a lost in the damned, right? You know, they typically are not featured as like narrative characters, and so it really goes into his mental and physical transformation. I specifically wrote it because I had never seen anything like it before, and I thought it was a unique idea that would catch someone's attention, and it turns out it actually was. So I can just speak from my own experience. 8 years of pitching Space Marine stories got me nowhere. Whereas writing you know, a slice of life story about some poor guardsman trying to survive long enough to go home to see his son that he's never met, and turning into a gruesome monster along the way. That apparently really resonated with them.
Real cool though. Kelbrin Yanissaries, what's cool about Andriy Petrov?
What's cool about Andriy Petrov was that how a person with very noble ideas could become totally monstrous, never actually lose sight of the ideas that he had in the first place. His driving motivation from the very beginning is the same that he has at the very end. He just becomes a murderous creature, totally removed from humanity, while never actually losing what it was that really drove him in there in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Is there just in having that idea, because similar conclusion of writing what you want to see. It's how I wound up writing Hounds of Bedlam, wanting to see that regular human that fall to chaos. Do you think that we're at the tipping point of just a flood of chaos human stories that we're just waiting? We just need, you know, maybe one day that can come, maybe not. But
well, you know, it's funny. You talk about like the things, like going back to what I was talking about before, fundamental rules of the universe, right? Chaos is this ever-eroding, inescapable force that is not only external, but is primarily internally based. It twists the most noble things about people into their, you know, the things that are monstrous. The darkest fears that they hope to avoid become the things that consume them and drive them to madness. Mm-hmm. You know, those are inherent things about the universe. That's something that I find very cool. And so I'm primarily a chaos fan. Actually, really every story that I have written so far, with the exception of, I believe, one, has been from the chaos perspective, because that's just the stuff that I find, you know, interesting. That's the rule of cool for me. I think that's cool. And those are the stories that resonate with me from a narrative level too. So we could be on the cusp of that. Who knows how many people find that interesting? But I do think that, you know, I would say that I do a lot of writing what I would like to read. And a lot of times the editors tell me, no, that's not, that's great. That's what you want to read. But I don't think anyone else wants to read that. Like, no one wants to read a slice of life story about the father of a White Scar who gets taken up, you know, to get taken up to become an Astartes, and, you know, his life as he progresses, never seeing his son, and then gets to see him again as an Astartes when he's an old man. That's a great story. I think that'd be interesting. They're like, yeah, that's not cool.
Well, we have talked about how fan fiction, just as a does allow for stories that are, because they are non-commercial, they're stories that can be told outside of pressures or constraints of that. In the same way, there is still a democratization of voice where you can experience gatekeeping just the same as you would in editorial control. It's about who gets to say what stories are worth telling. The answer may be found in is it a good story? It's very, very simple. Just bring it back to that.
Yeah, and, you know, honestly, that's one of the reasons that, I mean, you know, not to gush too much on you, Colyn, but why I love what you have built and what you do with Cold Open is that And I've now served as a judge for I believe at least one of these story competitions. I've had a great number of the people that submit to the Black Library's open submission, submit their things to me. I've seen a lot of fan fiction that people have written just outside of the 40K universe, and it's such an important platform for budding creatives to be able to explore this field, and to be able to share great stories. I have never been a guy that's been into like audio dramas. I got to do a little bit of voice acting on The Hunter's Watch, and
Yep.
that was the first time that I actually sat through and listened to a whole audio drama. And like, I love that sort of thing. It's like, I can't think of another venue where I would have gotten that. So there's a huge value to fan fiction, both as a way to just share stories that you enjoy with other people, and also to grow as a creative.
Well, I can't, the check is in the mail for that endorsement. Absolutely. So just in some of our closing remarks, just another 2 minutes. You were a judge on Fast Fiction 6, so The Stars Are Cold, voice actor in Hunter's Watch. I did get a private message here across Discord asking, what was your experience writing for Blackstone Fortress? A pretty open-ended question, to say.
Ooh, yeah. The Negavolt was the name of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was a great example of I wanted to do something that I'd never seen before. So when they first had asked me to write about Blackstone Fortress, I knew nothing about it as a universe, and so I just went through like the list of models, and I honestly looked for the thing that had the least amount of lore written about it, which I came across the Negavolt cultists, which had like 2 lines of description, and I was like, okay, is there anything else about it? Do they have any named characters? Do they have anything? And I said, no. You can kind of do what you want with that. So that actually honestly is what I look for a lot, is like where I can find really unexplored areas of the lore that I can really have a lot of fun with. And so I really developed a lot of like, hey, how do they become Negavolt cultists? And I picked a specific character and really got to explore the horrible situations that led to him becoming there. And he's kind of an I wouldn't say an anti-hero of the story, but that whole thing was just so much fun for me. I did actually have to rein in the scale a lot of times, because I pictured a lot of really grand conflict early on. And, the editor said, hey, for this setting, it's a lot of like more small, intimate fights, with characters. And so I did have to rein a lot of that in. But for me, it was just the most fun to get to explore something that had really just the very basic framework around it. And then you can just kind of go and do what you want, and now, hey, that's like established canon. So,
well, there was a canon, and I'm just quickly looking back for it here. Is a regular human falling to chaos? Was it cap canon? Is that the regular citizen doesn't know about chaos? I think one of the typical answers we see, at least in fandom, is that the galaxy is a big place. It allows for a lot of flexibility. If some people will know, some won't, to the degree of the lies. It's also just not a kind setting. Allows some flexibility there.
Yeah, and that's one of those things you talk about, like the rules of the setting, right? Like 40K, that kind of does apply, and it has, and I've seen it used by other Black Library authors as well, as a way to explain away things like that. And I think that's very valid. That's a part of the universe. It's huge, and so much information has been lost, and it's just a lot of vagaries that have turned into myths and legends and et cetera, et cetera. So that actually works. That may not work for other settings, but for this one it does.
The flexibility again of 40K being a great sandbox to play in. Nicholas, we are definitely at time. We're going to take a break after you have some more insights from another writer at Black Library. Quite excited for that. Nicholas, where can people find you? Give us a little bit more. This is your moment.
So I'm not great about the social media thing, candidly, but I do maintain a Twitter account at thenicholaswolf.com, or not .com. See, this is what I'm talking about, right? But no, I'm on there at the Nicholas Wolf. Connect with me. I love getting to meet fans and just other people who are passionate about the universe and other creatives. And if you do cool art, please let me know, because I'm also an art guy, and that was what I did professionally before writing. So I love to see your artwork. I love to see your stories. Share this stuff with me. It's what makes this whole deal so fun. So connect with me. I'd love to be able to meet you.
Awesome. Nicholas, thank you so much. Multifaceted talent. Happy to have you here today. If you're looking to find some more of Nicholas, you can find the stories he judged in Fast Fiction 6, The Stars Are Cold. You can also find him in Black Library's Reborn, Miracle, as well as Blackstone Fortress, Dire Chasm, and Deathwatch anthologies. I think the last ones still have to read. So
more to come.
More to come as well, but no spoilers. We'll keep that on the down low. Nicholas, thank you so much. Everyone, we're going to take a quick break and be back in just a couple minutes. Thank you.
Everyone.
We leap through the space, beyond space. The skiffs navigate the labyrinth realm, and when we emerge, the safety and tranquility of the webway is ripped away. We step into mayhem, into war. Apocalypse rages on a galactic scale. Entire sectors expunged of life and erased from existence. The Ingir and their soulless Necrontyr fight with vigor. But we have gods on our side.
For Cain!
The gods' words empower us, and we take on the Necrontyr with only a handful of warriors.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So we have a short video with some insights from another Black Library author. A special thanks to Mike Brooks for providing his insights today for our session. And if you're looking to check out more of Mike's writing, he is the author of Alfarius, Head of the Hydra, Rites of Passage, and the Necromunda Tales, Road to Redemption, and Wanted, Dead. We're going to queue up that video and get some more insights from Mike.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Brooks. I was asked to give you a little video about writing for Games Workshop and how I got there. So I have been a published author for 6 years now. I have a space opera trilogy of my own called the Kaiko series, beginning with Dark Run. And I've currently got an epic fantasy series coming out with Orbit in the UK and Solaris in the US, which is the God King Chronicles that starts with the Black Coast. For Games Workshop, I've written 4 novels that have been published so far and a number of short stories. I can't remember how many. I've written Brutal Cunning, amongst others, and also Alfarius, which I have this absolutely wonderful swanky edition of. I think there are still some available on eBay. If it says that it's signed, it's a lie. I haven't signed any of them. Writing for Games Workshop. How I started was I cheated. I tried to go in for open subs in 2015, I think, and I failed. They didn't want me. But I managed to get published in traditional publishing elsewhere. And because I live in Nottingham, I know people who work at Games Workshop, because if you live in Nottingham, you know people who work at Games Workshop, and because I'm a member of the alternative subculture, many of my friends have worked at Games Workshop. So I ended up playing in like Necromunda campaigns and stuff at Warhammer World, happened to meet someone who currently worked at Games Workshop, made a joking comment about, oh, I don't want some randomer writing stories about orcs, do they? To which his response was, well, you're not a randomer, you're a published science fiction author, I'll ask. He did, and apparently they did. I didn't get to write orcs at first, but I got there in the end, which was brilliant. So, yeah, I didn't actually get in the proper way. I got in off the basis of having been published elsewhere, which is kind of cheating in a very difficult way. So, in terms of getting in through open subs or stuff like that, I can't give you any advice because I didn't manage it. In terms, but what I do know is that Games Workshop will consider approaches from authors who've been published elsewhere. So if you have work that's been published elsewhere, even if it's in a sort of a very small press or an independent press or short stories in an anthology, something like that, it might be worth your time, if you want to write for Games Workshop, contacting them and saying, look, I am an author, I have had stuff published. I don't know their opinions on stuff like fan fiction, Games Workshop fan fiction. Obviously they can see your writing, but I don't know whether they consider that in the same manner. In terms of the differences between writing for Games Workshop and writing my own stuff, first of all, there's the differences in creative freedom. Obviously, when I'm writing my own stuff, I can create whatever I want. The difference is that I have to create everything. I have to do it all myself. For Games Workshop, I'm much more limited, but a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of world building has already been done. I don't need to work out how people can fly faster than light. They fly through hell. That's established. It's fine. It doesn't even have to make sense to me. I don't have to be happy with the own creation because that's how it is. It's a lot easier. I like to compare it to sort of an architect thing of if you're an architect and you design and build a house, and then you have to find someone to sell the house to, or you design a house in collaboration with people who already know broadly what they want, how big they want it to be, and they have a budget, and then you see whether you can do what they want within those criteria. And if you can, and you can do it competently, then they pay you. And that's how it is with Games Workshop. I do a lot less pushback with editors with Games Workshop. If I'm writing my own stuff and editors come to me and say, not sure about this, then I might argue for keeping it because it's my story, and I can have that sort of thing. Obviously, yeah, editors are editors for a reason, so it's a good idea to listen to them. For Games Workshop, I view that this is your story. If you want it changed, it gets changed. So you have to be much more. You can't have much of an ego if you're writing for an established intellectual property. You have to sort of go, no, this is your story. You are paying me to make a thing for you, so I will make it for you in the way you want it made. And hopefully you can go back and forth and come to an arrangement that you're happy with going out with your name on and they're happy with printing. One other quick thing I will just mention is payment schedules, because that's very important for authors. If you are writing a novel for Games Workshop, the payment schedules work a little bit differently for traditional publishing, at least my experience of it. Traditional publishing, when you write a novel, you get an agreed fee, and you get part of it when you sign the contract, and you get part of it when you deliver the manuscript, and you get part of it when the novel actually comes out, which could be a year down the line from when you've submitted the manuscript. For Games Workshop, it tends to work a bit different. You have an agreed time in which you're going to produce the novel. You get the fee when you sign the contract, you get the fee halfway through that time period, and then you get the remaining fee when they're happy with the final edits on the novel, which means you get paid a lot quicker because you don't have to wait for the book to come out. You've already been paid, and that can be very useful in terms of managing your money. So a quick video from me. I hope that was helpful. and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Fantastic insights from Mike. Want to give again a thanks to Mike for being a part of our today and for providing great kind of capstone on our conversations with authors who've Black Library. What we're going to do is we're going to take one more break here. Come back with a reading of the, which is a unofficial Warhammer 40,000 fiction piece that was published on Cold Open Stories, written by Joyce Chng. So just stay tuned with us, and we'll be back shortly.
his exposed arm molds and twirls. His flesh rearranges as easily as a potter shapes clay. From it, he creates a crab-like claw serrated with sickle-shaped teeth at the end of his forearm.
Mutant. You're worthy at...
With a slow thrust, he slides the talon down the guardsman's throat. The loyalist's jaw bursts first, opening it bare to the bone. The claw pushes, slowly, unhurried and as painfully slow as possible as the guardsman gurgles unclear vowels and cries. Perfectly measured, the moment is harrowing. He keeps him alive as he presses deeper. It's a tender, violating fetish. Slowly, his exposed arm molds and twirls. His flesh rearranges as easily as a potter shapes clay. What are you doing out here?
The Infernal Tarot?
The cards are all painted in hues of violet.
My own deck.
What for?
Divination. When I was a young girl, I had a fascination with Imperial saints, the Emperor's emissaries. I had this unwavering belief that I could contact them. I thought if I could hear the word of angels, I could unify mankind. So, I reached out. And something else answered.
Shadows creep in from the edges of my vision. They shimmer and bend as the trees creep in around us.
What in the name of the Holy Emperor is going on?
The situation is fluid. It is not safe for you to return to your habitation this evening. It has become necessary for you to grasp the enormity of the situation faced by the Hive and the Administratum. It is a little early in your career to take you into such confidence, but there is no other option. Here, please examine this photograph.
Holy Terra. What happened?
You will recall that I told you that Hive Dalet did not exist. It would, perhaps, have been more accurate to say it no longer exists.
What the hell is going on?
Stand by for next recording.
Wait. I want to ask something.
Well?
I know I made a mistake the first time, but I was so careful to get it right the second time. When I said the Grox was found in Hive Dalet.
Miss Solperov, the location to which you have just referred does not exist. Do not refer to it again.
But I...
Enough. I gave you a warning earlier. I shall not repeat it. Stand by for recording.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are here live reading DU by Joyce Chng, an author whose stories. Joyce lives in Singapore, and their fiction has appeared in the Apex book of world science fiction. We see a different frontier. I was personally introduced to Joyce through Strange Horizons, a fantastic author. And we also have a fantastic narrator here. We have Megan Humans, who would have heard recently in our Cold Open Stories audio drama on The Hunter's Watch. Welcome, Megan.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me.
And so what we have queued up here is just a narrative today. And we'll kick it off. Feel free, go right ahead. Everyone, enjoy. Thank you for being with us for our sessions today. This is our last one after the show. So let's get started.
What the hell is going on?
Prologue.
Stand by
Its
for next
name
record.
was Nixon Furnace, a demon in the form of a direwolf, dredged forth from old night. In my head, it ran on all four elongated legs, ending in wicked hooked claws. Its eyes were the color of blood, as was its entire body. I called it DU. Hell. But it wasn't like this. I wasn't like this. My fall was long and slow, but well deserved. Descent into hell. My grandmother, my Nai, the great Princeps Majoris of Indomitable, would have frayed me alive and hung me as a warning at the family gate. I had become a failure. The failure. The shame of the entire clan. But she was also many years dead. Tongshi, my cousin and closest ally, would have disowned me as well. Such was his fervor for family's pride, Mechanicus precision. He was long dead too. I couldn't even leave my situation, nor walk away as it is. Why? My fate was intertwined to Nixon Furnace, to DU, to hell. My flesh had become its circuits. How did I fall? Let me tell you my woeful tale. Was it temptation? Was it pride? My family was big on pride. We were the blessed Legio in the sector, with massive backing from the Mechanicus. The Legio IV of the great Chng and Princeps dynasty, our insignia was the character of woe. Fire. Our ancestors had incorporated the ancient language found everywhere in the family hall and in the Mechanicus forge that built and looked after the powerful Titan god machines. We advertised our pride and arrogance in crimson banners hung from the gun arms of our titans. Our Skitarii burned across battlefields in a tide of red fury. In our family hall, red couplets greeted the visitor the moment they stepped across the threshold. It was pride, plain and simple. And we were proud, because our kill counts were high. We served the God Emperor of Man. I continued training with the redoubtable Warhound Kalo. Recently promoted to Princeps of the Titan, I was proud of my achievement. Kalo was simply Kalo, a growing warrior who only lived for the hunt and would not be bound to any simple organics like me. Kalo only wanted to run and hunt like a predator. Tongshi was my Maserati. He kept a stern eye on my performance, commented on my increasing heart rate, and queried about Kalo's state of mind after every simulation. Kalo is a warhound, I stated. Tongshi sensed my ire and smiled. You were running hot, Princeps. It was a difficult simulation. I recalibrated the specs to mimic the conditions of our next assignment. Tongshi turned to his console while I disconnected from Kalo. The physical removal of the plugs was both painful and pleasurable. I dreaded disconnection, and missed the intimate bond, suffering from nervous tics and nightmares when I was away from Kay. The tech priests immediately swooped in to clean the connection ports. The Mago Bigolgis checked me over. Observation. The connection ports are clean, Magos U-88 said, her voice in a metallic drone. Thank you, Magos. Magos U-88's uniform had embroidered sleeves. The red threads glistened light. They reminded me of blood. Additional, Magos U-88 cleared her throat. It was an oddly inhuman inflection from a priest of Mars. Yes, Magos? Your heart rate was indeed high, as reported by the Moderati. Suggestion: moderate and monitor. Most of the time, Princeps experience strokes due to their strong connections. Thank you, Magos, for your concern. A slight smile tugged at the ends of Magos's thin lips. We serve the machines, and most of all, we serve the Omnissiah. I made the sign of the cog and bowed. In the family hall, the preparations for Spring Festival were in full swing, and the clan serfs hanging the crimson banners across the ceiling. I could smell the food from the kitchen, the fragrances of roasting meats, spices, and sweet treats wafted tantalizing breeze from the air vent. As much as most of the Princeps were in amniotic tanks, the Warhound and Reaver Princeps were still hard plugged and enjoyed a good feast now and then. My mouth watered at the prospect of savoring fowl with crispy skin. For the Mechanicus staff, rhyming couplets with praises to the God Emperor, the Omnissiah, and Spring Festival streamed forth in haptic and binary form. You could say that the air itself was filled with festive cheer. I was excited for the feast. Grandmother was the guest of honor. Tongshi had informed me while we strolled briskly down the walkway leading to the family hall. It was still cold this time of year. She insisted, Tongshi said. We all knew grandmother and her famous temper. I nodded, keeping my head down. The wind bit my face, and its chill stung the connection ports on my... The aurora is beautiful tonight. Tongshi's change of subject made me glance, then at the night. Indeed, the aurora that often appeared above the forge's skies billowed as if by astral winds. It was red tonight, tinged with edges of fluorescent green and yellow. It too celebrates Spring Festival, I laughed and hastened my pace, forcing Tongshi to run after me. Hey, wait up! Tongshi finally caught up to me the moment we reached the family gate, painted in vermilion. I could hear human and mechanized voices, all raised as if in excitement. The feast was about to start. You still mad with me because I pointed out you were running hot? Tongshi said. His eyes twinkled. I liked him more. He smiled. He wanted so much to be a moderator. He had served as famulus to my aunt, who was princeps to the Reaver Honyi. Before he'd managed to persuade grandmother and second aunt that he could fit as a moderati on Kalo. No. I have to say I am relieved, but you were running hot. I was afraid the reactor would just give in. Kalo was pushing you hard. She's a cantankerous old wolf, I said, and warhounds are known for their stubborn natures. Tongshi didn't reply. He just looked at me. Cousin to cousin, moderati to princeps. I knew he was concerned for my safety. I'm all right, I said. Come, let's enjoy the feast. The announcement. We will march on Tartarus's gate. Grandmother's voice thundered across the dining. Amplified by speakers installed on her tank, her words boomed. Not the whispery, tired old woman's voice I heard in the sanctum. It was now twined with something else, like a god's. indomitable, I realized. She spoke in the voice of her warlord. Legia Furore will fight on Tartarus's gate once more. The gathering roared their approval. I glanced at Tongshi, who returned a perturbed look. Is she really going to lead the Legio? I whispered. My bowl of broth untouched. My chopsticks hung uncertainly over the rice. Everyone seemed to have forgotten to eat. I know, grandmother. Can't. Shh! Listen! Tongshi hissed back. You don't know what you know. The council has decided. My daughter will lead. Legio Furore will rise once more like the phoenix. I breathed a sigh of relief. Glad that grandmother hadn't committed to what I worried she had. Not in her current state. This means we'll ship out next week. Tongshi was already calculating the logistics. Fascinating. My heart began to beat hard. I was finally going into battle with Kalo. A growl rose in my heart. Somewhere, I knew the wolf grit. Tartarus's Gate. We transited out of the Emiratium 2 weeks later. I didn't like the Emiratium. I couldn't sleep well, plagued by nightmares and leg cramps. The Magos biologists weren't perturbed and informed me that this was a normal occurrence for hard-plugged princeps. Warlord princeps, ensconced in their tanks, were spared this inconvenience. They were put into stasis sleep, their senses and physical bodies numbed. I exercised almost obsessively, running circuits around the ship. I sparred with Tongshi at the training hall using our wushu poles. Tongshi found it hard to sleep as well. We had a running bet on the cups of recaf we consumed per day, with the person who'd had the most being punished with additional calisthenics. The tech priests found our entertainment amusing. Our Mechanicus barge, Chng orbited Tartarus's Gate, while the priests and engine seers began the process of transporting the god machines. And god machines they were. Onerous and furious when awakened and reanimated. Princeps often dreaded and craved the reconnection with them in equal measure. Second Aunt likened the experience to the breaking of a wild stallion. You just did it again and again, every reconnection. It was an exhausting process. Trust had to be earned. Kalo snarled and snapped her jaws the moment I plugged into the manifold. Unlike the relative ease of the new sphere shared by the warlord princeps, hard-plugged princeps tapped into the manifold and the mind impulse units of the war engines. Kalo's MIU was a growing shadow, ready to bite anyone and everyone in sight. Even the princeps bonded to her. Who are you? Kalo demanded. I am your princeps, I said calmly. I don't know you, Kalo snarled, lips turning to bare fangs. Like training an aggressive guard dog, I slowly and painstakingly brought Kalo to heel, on my terms. It was a constant battle to keep the wolf from consuming me whole. Our target was a chaos-corrupted forge. My anger rose, my heart reactor glowering. Kalo sensed my rage and growled. The hard rain pattered on my ceramite skin. I kept linking raindrops from my eyelashes. And the smell of cordite or something rotten filled my nose. Tartarus's Gate had been beautiful once. From the dossier I'd assessed on the manifold, it was once lush, with forests and lakes. The dark Mechanicus had taken over, and now it was a polluted cesspit. Forward pace. 2 steps, quietly. We don't want to rustle the grass and scare the snake, I ordered. Keep the power at bare minimum. Moderati Tongshi and Tech Priest Tishan chorused their agreement. I began to pad forward, nose to the ground. Hunting mode. I could smell the prey. Pockets of fetid rot. Black masses swirl. A bright flare lit up the manifold. Battle was joined. Temptation. You could say this was where I began to fall. The very moment I began to ascend in the hierarchy and amass an impressive kill count. It was a delicious irony. Tartarus's Gate was where I first tasted the intoxicating blood of victory. The hunt was in my veins. I was running. I was prowling. The wind was on my skin. I was alive. Kalo was alive. When we first killed our enemy machine, Kalo and I howled in unison. We sounded our war horn. The sound boomed across the wasteland. It was a sorry-looking reaver, covered in black, as if it had been burned in fire. I was so glad to see the engine keel over and explode. Its death scream shook the manifold. Well done, everyone, I had said, still trembling from the massive influx of combat adrenaline. I felt as if I had sprouted fangs, my face a wolfish snout, and my body a muscular dire. Kalo was inside. I fought to stop myself from growling. It was much later. Tongshi told me that I had indeed been growling, hunched over, salivating and panting as we ran. The demon wolf began appearing in my dreams. By then, we were back in the Immaterium, hurtling through the madness towards home. We had defeated the foe. The Legio returned victorious, and Second Ant was pleased with my performance. It was a wolf shape, made of black, something cut from the void. A shimmering, flowing, sinuous wolf with eyes blazed like a reflector, and fangs like the light of curved moons. It danced in the periphery of my vision, inviting me to run with it. The forests, fields, plains, wastelands. Its lips curled in a wolfish grin. We hunt, we hunt, we hunt. In the dreams, I was naked and ran barefoot. I didn't care. I was a wolf, and the hunt was within my very veins. When we brought down prey, I could taste blood. Delicious, hot blood. The black wolf shape loped beside me. Sometimes I was it, and I felt powerful. I didn't tell Tongshi and my crew about the dreams. I blamed it on being unplugged from Kalo. I also blamed the Immertarium, the accursed Sea of Soul. That place was madness. They put on a lion dance when we returned from Tartarus's Gate. Grandmother followed tradition, according to Second Ant. We didn't have lions on Chang'an. It was a mechanized lion, with segmented parts of crimson and gold. Its eyes were bright lamps. its mouth a serrated maw that clapped as it weaved to the sound of monotonous drum beats. In the middle of its broad brow was a polished mirror, said to deflect and chase away the servants of chaos. The tech priests took immense pride in this mechanized look. To them, it was a magnificent artifice, combining both mortal artistry and the divine touch of Omnissiah. The drum beats resonated in the valley, echoing off the mountain peaks. We bowed to the tech priests as we alighted from the shuttle. A hero's welcome. I loved the rush of adulation. We were princeps. We were god machines. When we walked, the earth shook. U-88 approached me the day after we returned. She managed to find me in the training hall of the Chng stronghold. The Magos biologists were clad in her usual hooded robe of embroidered crimson thread. Only green eyes, the shade of the jade seams in the earth, peered out from the darkness of the hood. For some reason, U-88 had bionic eyes in the shape of a triangle. Rumination. Your heart rate is too high, she said without preamble. A consequence of being hard-plugged to a warhound, I replied, feeling suddenly defensive. All princeps, the Omnissiah be praised, experience the same, U-88 said. Clarification. Your heart rate is linked to your subconscious activity. You were dreaming. Such an organic word. But yes, your subconscious was indeed very active. Please, peruse this, she continued, showing the printout. U-88 was an odd one. She liked physical objects like paper instead of the usual digital and binaric means. The numbers looked confusing at first. Then the statistics began to make sense. I see a correlation between heart and subcortical activity, I said, but this is not conclusive. Data is data, U-88 replied. Was she smiling? There was humor in her voice. Data is knowledge, bless the Omnissiah. Data is evidence. I know. Observation. You do not know what you know. Explain, Magos. U-88 reverently folded the printout into a neat square. Clarification. An affectation of Moderati Tongshi, I believe. Yes, and the point is? Suggestion. Monitor this correlation, U-88 said abruptly before turning and sweeping away, her robes hissing softly. I stared at her retreating regal form. We hunt. The voice sounded as if it was right with me. I gripped my pole. Tongshi, is that you? If that's you, it's not funny, and it's not 7th month yet, I snapped. The Omnissiah and God Emperor blessed my cousin, but he was known for his pranks. We hunt. This time, it was right next to my ear. I spun around in a guard position, swinging the pole about. Look, Tongshi, Moderati, enough jokes and enough of your simulations. We're not due for combat for Cog's sake. Tongshi had a habit of creating difficult simulations besides his pranks to make me operationally ready. And he was convincing he did them. Something shifted at the edge of my peripheral vision, a shadow darting from one side of the room to the other. Tongshi, bloody hell, quit it! We hunt now! The words were right in my head. A powerful force hit me. I woke up later. my training pole next to me. A dream. Perhaps I'd hit my head on something. No, I hadn't. There was no bump, nor bruise, nor blood. I was lucid. U-88 was here talking. Then the voice. The voice. It wasn't a dream. Or was it? I didn't see you at evening meal, Tongshi said. He took a step back. What's wrong? Look like you've seen a ghost, I said, hiding my fear. What just happened? My mind was in a blurry swirl. You look like you are when you're plugged into Kalo. What? I caught sight of myself in the polished mirror hung on the wall. My predecessors had a thing about mirrors, old superstitions and traditions, like the characters in writing script my grandmother insisted we use. Old superstition stories. I saw my eyes gleaming amber. My hands looked like claws. I had bared my teeth. As Princeps Majoris, Second Aunt led Legio Furore. She was my immediate commander and decider of my fate. She ordered me straight to the labs of the Majos biologist to be thoroughly examined by U-88 and her staff. I could swear that U-88 was smiling under her hood, even though I knew that the majority of the Mechanicus frowned upon organic expressions like smiling. And if tech priests could express smugness. I am not defective, I stated clearly, emphasizing every word. I admit at that moment I was defensive. Clarification. That is an erroneous statement. U-88 put away her scanner. She studied me as if I were an insect. Then what's wrong with me? I tried to sit up, but a firm metallic hand pressed me down. I suppressed an instinctive growl. Now, where did that come from? U-88 glided across the lab, uttering rapid binaric instructions to her assistants. She didn't answer, seemingly happy to let me stew in the silence. Magos? Rumination. The word wrong is a generic term, the Majos biologist said, which does not completely fit your current situation. There are cases where princeps identify too strongly with their agents. Praise the Omnissiah. You might be one possible case. You mean I think I'm a canid because Kalo's personality is a canid? I will not articulate in such a crude manner, but I state agreement. So you're saying that I'm behaving like this because of Kalo? U-88 visibly shuddered. That was her only comment. I thought it was extremely human of her. Second Aunt bubbled in her tank, serene in her power. Dressed in our dark red clan uniform, I knelt before her. I have perused the tech priest's report. Second Aunt's voice was low, imperious. I dared peer upwards. Her thin hair floated about her head like a mossy halo. The cords twined around her limbs like pythons I'd seen in the tropical swamps. Her skin, like grandmother's, was wrinkly. For reasons unknown, she had kept her hands and feet. Her nails had grown to the length of talons. I glanced at my own hands, suddenly seeing an overlay of hooked claws. I shook my head. The illusion disappeared. Perhaps U-88 was right. Acclimatization takes time, Second Aunt said. Unlike grandmother's sanctum, Second Aunt's chamber was still human, filled with physical artifacts. Before she became a warlord princeps, Second Aunt collected vases and examples of elegant calligraphy. Well-preserved replicas of famous calligraphers like Lu Zhu and Bei Hong hung on the walls of her chamber. Ceramics done in the style of Neo-Ming graced rosewood shelves. Even now, her hobby persisted. 2 antique vases flanked her tank. Also Neo-Ming, I noticed. I'm aware, Princeps Majoris. I bowed. Take control, or be subsumed, Second Aunt intoned, and her tank went dark, a sign that the meeting had concluded. Legio lore was replete with accounts of princeps lost in the manofield or noosphere. The MIUs of their engines had overwhelmed them. The princeps in our clan spoke about drowning or being pulled under. Was this what I was experiencing? Being pulled under? Drowning? No, I was alive. My body sang. In no way was I drowning. I took out my rage and excess energy in the family gymnasium. Tongshi, upon seeing my mood, stayed far away from me. He knew to give me space. Mother. So it came as a surprise when I received the summons from Mother. My mother was no longer part of the Legio. She had been a Moderati, and famulus to grandmother, as well as a warhound princeps, before she'd decided to retire early. Prematurely, as clan gossip went. My relatives hinted it was because of me. Her warhound had been named Tiango, Sky Dog. Now she tended the clan's indoor gardens, a horticulturist. It was indeed a place for respite, for meditation. Mother had made it so, insisted it to be. That was the clan in her, our sheer stubbornness. Under her care, the indoor gardens flourished. Peonies grew as big as my head, cherry blossoms perfumed in the air, chrysanthemums exploded in shades of yellow and orange. The carpet grass was lush, and, in a world of metal and machines, gratifyingly real. Mother was clad in blue gardener's smock. She had donned a wide-brimmed straw hat. Her hands wore orange gloves that looked well used. When I approached her, she was digging a hole with a small black mattock. A sapling of an unknown botanical genus rested beside her. Meijing, she said. Her voice was warm, like the golden maltose honey treats I'd loved as a child. I bowed before embracing her. She smelled of soil and sweat. A faint lingering fragrance hid beneath this. Lavender. I heard from Second Aunt, Mother said. Acclimatization takes time. Do not rush the process. There was a hint of something in her voice. Regret? I know, Mother. Tiango tested my boundaries so many times, you know. She was such an aggressive creature, always looking for a fight. She was our best scout. Tiango was now decommissioned. The warhound rested in the reserve vaults of the Legio. Not one tech priest nor engine seer had awakened her spirit. Kalo might be testing you, Mother said, patting the soil around the sapling. I heard the soft thud, thud, thud of her hand. They sounded like heartbeats. I know, Mother. My sister can be harsh in her words, but she's genuinely concerned. We have seen this before. I nodded. Hunt. Voice again. It sounded like me, but not me. Kill. Ignoring the voice, I gazed around the gardens. It was peaceful. A burning landscape. Titan corpses littered every inch of it. The sound of baying hounds in the sky. And a howl coming from my throat. You are not alone, Mei Chng. Mother cut through the brain fog with a firm tone that brought my mind back to reality. I've been through similar experiences. You will emerge stronger. Mother, don't fear it. You control the engine, not the reverse. Blood. The image of the burning landscape remained, as if seared on my mind. I could smell fire. Hunt now. I saw myself in a strange double image. I was Kalo. I was myself. I was a raging wolf made of black smoke and blood. I didn't embrace Mother when I left. The images terrified me. Was I drowning? To shake off the feeling of sheer terror, I went for a run around the stronghold. I skipped evening dinner, ignored Tongshi's messages, and went straight to my bedchamber. There I stripped and stood under the cold shower for a long time. The dreams that night were of flame and burning, and an open wolf maw filled with dripping teeth. I was the wolf. I tore into flesh, drinking blood. I was both corrupted flesh and ceramite. Yet I laughed and howled. I relished the hunt. I reveled in the pain of my prey. When I woke up, or thought I woke up, there was thick, acrid smoke everywhere. Alarms were blaring throughout the entire forge. The entire stronghold shook. My home was on fire. I realized I wasn't in my bed. I looked down, and I saw Kalo's Inferno gun, plasma blast gun. An image of talons seemed to be superimposed on them. My head hurt. Everything was bathed in shades of red. Were the talons dripping blood? Human blood? I had descended into hell.
Hi there, Megan. Thank you so much for this wonderful reading of Joyce Chng's story. For anyone who's looking to hear of Megan, you can hop on over to coldopenstories.com, where you can hear her as Shasfrey Tashvar Mkova Irvi in On the Hunter's Watch. I know, Megan, you're very busy, a lot of acting. Thank you for taking the time to do this reading with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me back to do something else. This was very fun. I was a little nervous, so please bear with me, everyone. I hope it came through all right. And I hope everyone enjoyed. This was really fun to read. It was a really interesting piece.
It's a wonderful story. One of the longer ones that we have on the site. You can find this within our short fiction collections, as well as you can submit your own story before the end of November. Call for submissions. So we're going to wrap up here today. Megan, thank you again for being a part of this. Thank you, everyone, the entire audience, for watching throughout the day. A lot of great sessions. Hopefully this will have helped encourage you to continue writing, to continue growing, acting, performing, whatever it is, the arts that you want to engage with, and to be a big fan of Warhammer 40,000 and other franchises as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Get the promise of a brighter tomorrow. In the grim, dark future, there is only war. ColdOpenStories.com. Short fiction, audio dramas, produced by fans.